That night, I was over at my daughter Chloe's place, this massive mansion up in Westlake Hills, overlooking Austin. We were supposed to be having a family barbecue. Then the phone rang. It was Marcus, my old neighbor, and his voice sounded incredibly tight in the muggy Texas night air. "Arthur, are you home?" "No, I'm over at Chloe's for dinner," I said, a little confused. "Then who the hell is out on your property right now?" he whispered. "There's a bulldozer here." My blood ran cold, but before I could even process what he was saying, my son-in-law, Derek, looked up from his fancy plate of smoked ribeye. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look worried. He just leaned back in his chair and let out this soft, hollow chuckle that sent a chill straight down my spine. "That's the demolition crew, Arthur," Derek said, wiping his mouth like it was nothing. "We sold the land this afternoon. You don't live there anymore." "My name is Arthur Vance. I'm 68 years old. For the past 40 years, I worked as a forensic accountant and corporate auditor. My entire career was built on digging through the books of bankrupt companies, tracking dirty money hidden away in offshore accounts and shell corporations. I know exactly how much pressure it takes to snap a company's financial spine. I know how to peel back layers of fake assets with surgical precision. But sitting at that expensive walnut dining table, I realized I had absolutely no idea how much betrayal a father could take before his own mind snapped. I just sat there, staring at the cold steak on my china plate, trying to ignore the knot tightening in my stomach. This was supposed to be a nice family dinner, but the air in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Derek was sitting at the head of the table, wearing a custom suit that cost more than my first car, checking his Rolex every 30 seconds. He's 36, the founder of some tech startup in decentralized finance, and he talks and lives at 1,000,000 miles an hour. But tonight, his eyes were darting all over the room, actively avoiding mine, like I was a debt collector showing up on his doorstep. To his right was Chloe. She's 34, her blonde hair is always styled perfectly, and her phone might as well be surgically attached to her hand. She calls herself a luxury real estate investor and a lifestyle blogger. She spends her days taking photos of infinity pool reflections and posting about mindfulness philosophies she doesn't actually understand. To her, I wasn't a parent or someone to respect. I was a prop, an antique, a piece of old furniture that clashed with her minimalist, modern decor. The dinner had been a disaster from the start. The food was expensive takeout from a high-end restaurant, plated to look homemade. Chloe pushed a bowl of kale salad toward me with a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You need to eat more of this, Dad," she said in that condescending tone people use for toddlers or pets. "We were just reading an article about how important nutrition is for seniors, especially those showing signs of cognitive decline." I gripped my fork a little tighter. I wasn't declining. My brain was just as sharp as it was back when I was dismantling money laundering networks in Miami. But they needed me to be weak. They needed me to be confused. It fit their narrative. "I'm fine, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm just not hungry." She exchanged a look with Derek, the kind of look that said, "See? I told you he'd be difficult." Then she turned away and took a sip of her Pinot Grigio. "We were just thinking, Dad." Derek finally spoke up, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. "That old ranch, it's just too much for one person to handle. 300 acres, old plumbing, it's dangerous." Here we go again. We'd been having variations of this same conversation for 6 months. They wanted me off my land. The ranch I bought back in the 80s with my late wife, Eleanor, where we raised Chloe. The property was fully paid off. It held every piece of what I had left of the woman I loved for 40 years. "I am perfectly capable of taking care of my ranch," I cut him off. "I fixed the barn roof myself last month. I drive the tractor. I am not helpless." Chloe sighed, placing a hand on Derek's arm as if to comfort him, implying I was the unreasonable one. "It's not about capability, Dad. It's about your quality of life," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We found this incredible 24-hour care facility downtown. Full-time nurses, tons of activities. You'd be around people your own age instead of being isolated out in the middle of nowhere. A care facility. the polite word for a place where they warehouse old people until they die. I looked around their luxurious dining room, taking in the crystal chandelier, the imported rugs, the expensive-looking but completely meaningless abstract art on the walls. Then my eyes caught something sticking out from under the edge of the linen tablecloth. Right by Derek's elbow, a stack of envelopes was peeking out. They had bright red warning labels stamped on them, not greeting cards. Final notices. My forensic accountant brain started putting the pieces together. Derek was driving a leased Porsche, and Chloe was spending thousands a month on designer bags to keep up appearances. Yet, they were hiding past due notices under the dinner table. My son-in-law wasn't worried about me being lonely. He was worried about his cash flow. He didn't see me as a father-in-law. He saw me as a piggy bank that refused to break. I was just about to call them out on the envelopes when the phone in my pocket started buzzing. In the quiet room, the noise made Chloe jump. "Excuse me," I said, pulling out my old rugged phone. It was Marcus, my neighbor of 30 years. He's a retired FBI agent who sleeps with one eye open and doesn't trust anyone besides me in his lab. He wouldn't call unless the house was on fire. "Hey, Marcus," I answered immediately. "Arthur," Marcus said. His voice was low, tight, and carried a controlled urgency that scared me way more than if he'd been screaming. "Where are you? Are you home?" "No, I'm at Derek's for dinner. What's going on?" "Listen to me carefully, Arthur. There's a flatbed truck parked in your driveway, a bulldozer, no plates. There are workers out there right now, tearing down Eleanor's greenhouse." My hand gripped the phone so hard the plastic casing creaked. "What are you talking about? Is it a demolition crew? Did you call the cops?" "I don't think it's a break-in, Arthur. They aren't trying to hide it, and they're moving fast. They just carried your mahogany desk out of the study and dumped it on the lawn. They ran right over Eleanor's orchids with the tractor. It looks like they're clearing the whole place out." Eleanor's orchids, the rare South American varieties my wife had babied for years. They were destroying them like trash. I slammed my chair back, scraping it loudly against the hardwood floor. Chloe dropped her fork. "Dad, what is it?" she asked, annoyed. "Who's calling you this late?" I ignored her. My eyes locked onto Derek. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring down at his wine glass, slowly twirling the stem. His jaw clenched so hard a muscle was twitching. "I'm on my way back, Marcus. Don't let them leave." I barked into the phone and hung up. I looked down at my son-in-law. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a war drum of pure betrayal. "Derek!" He didn't look up. "Derek, look at me," I commanded, using the exact same tone I used to use when tearing down financial fraudsters in a deposition. He slowly raised his eyes, and what I saw in them made my bones ache. There was no guilt, no shame, just this frantic, glassy stillness. It was the look of a gambler who had pushed every last chip into the center of the table and was waiting for the roulette wheel to stop spinning. "Marcus says there are bulldozers at my house. They're tearing down Eleanor's greenhouse," I said, every word dripping with ice. "Who are they, Derek?" The silence stretched for 1 second, then 2. Then Derek smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a jagged, broken expression. "They aren't tearing it down, Arthur," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "They're clearing the lot." "Clearing the lot?" I whispered, the room starting to tilt. "We sold it," Chloe chimed in, picking up her wine glass again like we were discussing the weather. "We signed the paperwork this afternoon. A cash buyer, a developer. They wanted immediate possession of the site. It's a fantastic deal, Dad, really. You should be thanking us." "Sold it," I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "You couldn't have sold my ranch. It's my property. My name is on the deed." Derek let out a short, ugly laugh. "Not anymore, it isn't? Remember those papers you signed last month? The insurance updates? The medical proxy stuff? You signed a durable power of attorney, Arthur. A total sweeping power of attorney that grants me full control of your assets in the event that you are deemed incapacitated." I stared at him. My mind raced back to a few weeks ago when I had a brutal case of the flu. He'd brought a stack of documents to my bed, saying it was just standard updates for medical coverage, saying he wanted to make sure everything was taken care of if I got sick again. I trusted him. He was family. I signed them without reading the fine print, because who expects their own kid to hand them a financial death warrant? I am not incapacitated, I roared, stepping toward the table. I am standing right here. Dr. Vance doesn't see it that way, Chloe said, looking down at her nails. We have a medical evaluation from him stating that you're showing advanced signs of dementia, paranoia, confusion, and aggression. It's more than enough to trigger the clause. The sale is legal, Dad. $1.5 million is already in escrow. Derek closed his eyes, almost tasting the number. Cash, Arthur. Do you know what that kind of money fixes? Everything. No more mortgages, no more collectors, no more problems. Collectors. The word hung in the air. I looked back down at the red envelopes under the tablecloth. This wasn't just greed. It was desperation. My son-in-law was in deep enough to drown, and he decided to sacrifice me to save himself. You sold my home, I said, my voice shaking. Not from old age, but from a white-hot, bone-deep fury. You sold the place your mother died. You destroyed her orchids. It's just stuff, Dad, Chloe finally snapped, dropping the sweet act entirely. You don't need 300 acres to yourself. It's selfish. You're sitting on all that equity while your family is struggling. We did this for us. For this family. For this family, I said. I looked at Chloe, waiting for her to say something in my defense, to show some shred of the girl I raised. But she just poured herself another glass of wine, her hand trembling slightly. It's a done deal, Arthur, Derek said, refusing to meet my eyes again. You don't live there anymore. You live here now. We're converting that windowless media room downstairs off the guest suite for you. It's better this way. You'll be safe here. We got the money. Everybody wins. A media room. They sold my entire life, my memories, my independence. And now they were planning to dump me in a windowless black box, like some broken old tool. But I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. My training as a forensic accountant kicked in and cold, hard logic took over. Assess the damages. Find the vulnerabilities in the system. Calculate the counterstrike. This isn't over, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Derek laughed again, that same hyena-like cackle. Oh no, Arthur, it's completely over. The locks have already been changed. The new owners have the keys. And you? He pointed a finger at me. You're just a confused old man who needs his daughter and son-in-law to take care of him. Sit down, eat your dinner. You're not going anywhere. I looked at the door. Then I looked at the kitchen island where a set of car keys was sitting. The keys to my truck. I lunged for them. Derek was younger and faster, but he was soft. He'd spent his entire life sitting in air-conditioned offices and ergonomic gaming chairs. I was old, but I'd spent my life doing hard physical labor on a ranch. I threw my weight forward and slammed my shoulder directly into his chest, knocking the wind right out of him. He crashed backward into the china cabinet, and crystal glasses came raining down around him, shattering like sharp, glittering confetti. Chloe screamed, jumping out of the way. "Stop it! You're insane!" I snatched my keys off the counter, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "You can't drive!" Derek gasped, struggling to push himself up from the floor. "Your insurance is void. I canceled it. You're a danger!" I didn't even look back. I slammed the front door behind me and ran toward my old Ford F250. It was a weathered truck with rust around the wheel wells, but that V8 engine was bulletproof. I cranked the key, and the engine roared to life with a deafening, furious growl, the sound of freedom. As I threw it into reverse and backed out of the driveway, I saw Derek sprint out of the house, his face purple with rage. He was waving his arms and shouting, but I mashed the gas pedal, and the tires screeched against the asphalt. I drove fast, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The streetlights blurred past the windows like streaks of fire. My mind was spinning, trying to untangle the nightmare. They sold my land. They forged my consent. They declared me crazy. I reached for my phone and hit Marcus's number on speed dial. "I'm 10 minutes out," I told him. "Are they still there?" "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice heavy. "And Arthur, you need to get here fast. They just brought in a hydraulic excavator. They're getting ready to tear down the load-bearing walls of the main house. My house. The place where I had personally laid every single piece of hardwood floor when Chloe was barely old enough to walk. The place where I held Eleanor's hand during her final days. They were destroying it. I pushed the gas pedal all the way to the floor. The engine roared in protest, but the truck surged forward. I wasn't just fighting for a piece of real estate. I was fighting for my dignity, my history, and God help anyone who got in my way. When I tore onto the gravel road leading to my ranch, I saw the flashing lights. Not police lights, but the orange hazard strobes of construction vehicles. A row of massive industrial dumpsters sat right in the middle of my driveway, filled to the brim with my life, tossed aside like garbage. And right there in the yard was a yellow excavator, its massive mechanical arm raised, aiming straight for the front porch. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I slammed my hand onto the horn, letting out a long, angry blare, and steered the truck right onto the grass, aiming straight for the excavator's tracks. The driver panicked, killing the engine and scrambling out of the cab. I slammed on the brakes, and the F-250 skidded across the lawn, tearing up the grass Eleanor used to tend so carefully. I kicked the door open and climbed out, pulling a heavy steel tire iron from behind the seat. "Get off my property!" I roared, my voice echoing through the quiet valley. The workers froze, looking at each other in total confusion. They were big guys, but they were just day laborers pulling a shift. When they looked at me, they stopped dead. I might have been 68, but tonight, holding a steel bar with the fires of betrayal burning in my eyes, I must have looked like a demon straight out of hell. "Take it easy, old-timer," the foreman said, raising his hands. "We got a permit from the developer. We're supposed to have this lot cleared before sunrise." "I am the owner." I swung the tire iron through the air. "Anyone who takes another step is going to find out how many bones this old-timer can still break." Right then, a black Porsche came screeching to a halt at the edge of the property. Derek and Chloe jumped out, closely followed by a police cruiser with its lights flashing. "Officer, that's him!" Derek shouted, pointing at me dramatically. "That's my father-in-law. He's having a psychotic break. He's armed and dangerous." Two young cops stepped out of the cruiser, their hands resting on their holsters. They saw an angry old man with a steel bar squaring off against a construction crew. I knew exactly how it looked. "Drop the weapon, sir," one of the officers yelled, shining a flashlight directly into my eyes. "Drop it right now." I looked at Derek. He was standing safely behind the cops, a smug little smirk on his face. He had the paperwork, he had the script, he had the power, or so he thought. I slowly lowered the tire iron, let it drop onto the grass, and raised my hands. "This is my home," I said, my voice hoarse. "My son-in-law stole my land." "Sir, step away from the vehicle," the officer ordered, completely ignoring my words. "We got a call about a domestic disturbance and trespassing." "Trespassing?" I let out a bitter, broken laugh. "Trespassing in my own home." That night, as the cold, tight handcuffs clicked around my wrists, I looked back at Derek. He was holding Chloe, putting on a big show of being the worried, grieving son-in-law for the officers, but his eyes were dead. "Don't worry, Arthur," Derek whispered, leaning close as the officer guided me into the back of the cruiser. "We're going to get you the kind of help you need. That windowless room is waiting for you." He thought he won. He thought the game was over. But as the cruiser pulled away, leaving my broken home to the vultures, I made a vow. "My name is Arthur Vance. I've tracked anomalies through the most complex offshore accounts in the world, and I've brought down Wall Street giants. No matter what it takes, I am going to bring this entire house of cards crashing down on their heads." Under the harsh, headache-inducing fluorescent lights of the police station, I sat on a hard wooden bench. The metallic sting of the handcuffs was still fresh on my wrists. It was 2 a.m. The air smelled like stale coffee and desperation. I, a 68-year-old corporate auditor who had spent his entire life following the law, was sitting there like a common criminal, waiting for someone to bail me out. Finally, the heavy security door buzzed open. Derek walked in. He didn't look worried. He just looked annoyed. He adjusted his silk tie, scanning the room with a mix of arrogance and impatience. He scribbled his name on the release forms at the front desk with his expensive Mont Blanc pen. not even glancing at me until the officer unlocked the holding cell. "Let's go, Arthur," Derek said, his voice flat. "Lucky for you, I know a few people on the force. Otherwise, you'd be spending the night in the county jail." I stood up slowly, my knees popping. I wanted to tell him I didn't need his luck. I needed my home, but I kept my mouth shut. I followed him out into the cool Austin night air. The humidity hung thick around us. "Get in," he ordered, pointing to his Porsche. I climbed into the passenger seat. The leather was soft, smelling of new car and vanilla, a stark contrast to the rusty truck I had just lost. We drove in total silence. The city lights blurred across the dark windows. I watched the route, expecting him to turn back toward the ranch, to let me see what was left of my home. But he swung left, heading onto the highway toward Westlake Hills. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice raspy. "Home," Derek said, keeping his eyes on the road. "My home, not yours. Your place is gone, Arthur. Get used to it." When we pulled into his driveway, the massive modern mansion loomed in the dark like a fortress. Chloe was waiting by the front door. Her arms were crossed, and her face was set in a mask of cold disapproval. "I can't believe you made such a scene," she hissed under her breath as we walked up the steps. "The neighbors were watching. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is?" I didn't answer. I just looked at her, remembering when she used to sit on my knee, thinking she was a sweet girl who would grow up to have a good life. I had been completely blind. The inside of the house was freezing cold and deathly quiet. Derek didn't take me upstairs to the guest room, the one with the plush carpeting and the queen-sized bed. Instead, he led me down to the very end of the main hallway and threw open a narrow, heavy door leading to the basement media room. "Down you go," Derek said, gesturing into the pitch black. I stared at him, then looked down the dim, steep staircase. "You're locking me in a windowless cellar." "It's a soundproof multimedia suite," Derek replied defensively. "We put a bed down there. It's private. You'll have your own space. Frankly, after tonight, I don't trust you upstairs. You'd probably try to burn the place down." I walked down the steps. With every single step, the air grew colder and more stagnant. The acoustic paneling on the walls gave off a chemical stench of industrial glue and trapped air. In the corner sat a lumpy twin mattress on a metal frame, made up with old sheets from my ranch that were 20 years old. "This is it," Derek said, standing at the top of the stairs. "Don't even bother trying to leave. The security system is armed. If you open that door or mess with the keypad, the cops will be here in 3 minutes. And this time, I'm not bailing you out." He slammed the door shut. The electronic lock engaged with a heavy metallic click. A definitive, final sound. Just like that, I was a prisoner, locked away in the basement of the daughter I raised. I stood there in the dark for a long time, listening to his footsteps fade away over my head. Slowly, my eyes adjusted. There were no windows, just a tiny ventilation grate near the ceiling. Most people would have panicked. Most people would have screamed and pounded on the door, begging to be let out, begging for their dignity. But I wasn't most people. I was a forensic auditor. I knew that when a company is collapsing into bankruptcy, panic is the enemy. You have to trace the hidden money trail, preserve your evidence, and wait for the exact right moment to play your hand. I sat down on the lumpy mattress, the springs groaning underneath me. It was deeply humiliating, but I didn't let the shame take root. Instead, I channeled it into anger. It became a cold, hard knot in my chest, a source of fuel. I reached deep into the lining of my heavy canvas work jacket. Derek and Chloe hated this jacket. They thought it made me look like a vagrant. They hadn't bothered to search me because they couldn't imagine something that worthless, holding anything of value. They were wrong. I felt along the inner seam near my left armpit, right where I'd stitched a hidden pocket years ago. I reached inside and pulled out the cold plastic shell of my backup burner phone, a rugged, old-school Nokia with a full battery. I also pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. I checked the screen. 1 bar of service. Good enough. I dialed a number from memory. After 2 rings, a sharp, professional female voice answered. "Arthur, it's 3 a.m. This better be an emergency." "Evelyn," I said, keeping my voice down. "They did it. They sold the ranch. There was a long pause on the line, followed by the rustle of papers. Evelyn was the top trust attorney in Texas, my closest confidant, and the only person alive who knew the true extent of my net worth. She was a powerhouse in a power suit, and she had been waiting for this phone call. "Are you safe?" Evelyn's tone sharpened instantly. "I'm locked in Derek's basement media room," I said, "but I have my books." "Perfect," Evelyn said, switching right back into business mode. "Do you want me to send a SWAT team? I can have the police surround that house in 20 minutes for elder abuse, false imprisonment, and fraud." "No," I said firmly, "not yet." "Why, Arthur, they crossed the line. Because if we hit back right now, all we get is the house," I said, watching the shadows on the concrete floor. "I want to know why, Evelyn. Derek is a tech guy, but even a desperate tech guy doesn't dump his father-in-law's ranch for a fire sale cash price in a single afternoon unless someone is holding a gun to his head. I need to know who's holding the gun." "Fair point," Evelyn said. "What are your orders?" "I'll follow the money," I told her. "The sale proceeds. The 1.5 million. It hits Derek's account tomorrow morning. I want to know exactly where every single dollar goes. Don't freeze it. Let him feel rich. Let him feel safe." "You got it," Evelyn said. "And Arthur?" "Yeah? Keep the phone off during the day. Only call me at night. Stay sharp, old friend." I hung up, tucking the phone and the notebook back into the hidden lining. I lay back on the mattress, staring up at the pitch-black ceiling. In my head, I began running through complex financial models and balance sheets, a mental exercise that always kept me grounded. Eventually, I drifted off. A few hours later, a muffled sound woke me up. Right above my head, Chloe and Derek were in the kitchen. The ventilation ducts in this house worked like an old-school intercom, carrying their voices directly down into the basement. I stood up, quietly stepping over to the vent on the wall and pressed my ear against the cold metal. "I can't believe we actually pulled it off." Chloe's voice drifted down, a little distorted, but entirely clear. She sounded ecstatic. 1.5 million. "Derek, we're free." "We're not free, Chloe." Derek's voice came back, tight and completely wired with anxiety. "We're just safe for now. There's a difference." "Oh, don't be such a buzzkill," she complained. "We deserve this. Do you know how hard it was to pretend to care about that old man smelling like dirt? Listening to his boring stories about accounting? We earned this money." I clenched my fists, my fingernails digging deep into my palms. "The second that wire clears, we have to move the funds immediately," Derek said, ignoring her. "Don't spend a single cent, Chloe. I am dead serious." "Why?" she whined. "I already looked up flights to Dubai and I want to go to the Maldives. We can take so many photos. My engagement metrics will go through the roof. As for him, we can just leave an automatic feeder downstairs." "We can't go to the Maldives," Derek hissed, his voice dropping to a harsh, panicked whisper. "Listen to me. The people in Miami don't have any patience. The deadline is this Monday." "The people in Miami?" Chloe went quiet for a second. "What people?" "Private equity guys, Chloe. The people who loaned me the money." Derek sounded like he was on the verge of tears. "The startup was a shell. I used their capital to short crypto, and I lost everything. They told me last week that if I didn't cover the 1.5 million cash shortfall by Monday, they'd take my hands, and then they'd come looking for you." I froze against the vent. 1.5 million. My son-in-law wasn't just a failed entrepreneur. He was an embezzler who had tangled with some incredibly dangerous loan sharks. "Oh my God," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. "You owe 1.5 million. "Yes," Derek said, "but the house sold for exactly that. We pay off the Miami guys and the debt is wiped clean. Then we file for corporate bankruptcy and wash our hands of the whole thing. We just need to keep the old man quiet for a few months until the smoke clears, and then we'll dump him in a state-run nursing home." So that was it. I wasn't just a burden, I was collateral damage for his gambling addiction. But how are we supposed to live after that? Chloe's greedy nature quickly overrode her fear. "We still need money, Derek. We're already behind on the mortgage for this place." "We'll get more," Derek assured her. "I went through his files. He's got a pension. It's not huge, but it's steady. We can siphon that off, and that truck can be sold for scrap. Every little bit helps. We just have to keep him confused, keep him medicated, and keep him downstairs." Then they laughed. It was the laughter of two criminals who thought they'd just gotten away with murder and were already planning how to spend the inheritance. I stepped away from the vent, my heart beating with a slow, heavy rhythm. My daughter wasn't just ungrateful, she was a co-conspirator. She was entirely willing to bury me in a basement and drug me out of my mind. I walked back and sat on the mattress. The anger was still there, but it had transformed. It wasn't a hot flame anymore. It was cold steel. They wanted to play financial games. They wanted to talk about debt and hidden assets. I reached inside my jacket and felt the leather notebook. Inside that book were the access codes to a private trust in Delaware, a fund holding the anonymous whistleblower rewards from 3 major corporate fraud cases I'd busted in the 90s, along with decades of investment returns piled up in lucrative offshore tax havens. It generated nearly $3 million a year in passive income. Derek thought he'd hit the jackpot by selling a ranch for $1.5 million. He had absolutely no idea he was sitting on a gold mine, and he had no idea the man in the basement was holding the detonator. I lay down and closed my eyes. For the first time in hours, I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a wolf watching a rabbit walk right into a trap. Let them pop the champagne. Let them pay off the Miami guys, I thought, because I'm going to take everything else. The next morning, when the sunlight barely started to peek through the crack beneath the door, the lock clicked open. I was already awake, sitting perfectly upright against the cold wall. Chloe walked down the stairs holding a tray. Her high heels made a sharp, clacking noise against the wooden steps. She was wearing a pink silk robe with a full face of makeup, but her eyes held a frantic, hyperactive energy that put me on edge. She looked like a nurse out of a horror movie, the kind who smiles at you while tightening the restraints. "Good morning, Dad," she said, her voice bright and cheerful as she set the tray down on an overturned cardboard box. "I brought you some breakfast, oatmeal and fruit, totally healthy. Oh, and your vitamins. You need to keep your strength up." I looked down at the bowl of oatmeal. It was a dull gray, clumpy, and unappetizing. Next to it sat a little paper cup holding 2 pills, one small, round, white tablet, and a capsule filled with bright blue powder. "I don't take vitamins, Chloe," I said, my voice raspy from hours of silence. "My doctor says all my blood work is perfect." "Oh, but these are special," she insisted, pushing the little cup a little closer to me. "Derek and I consulted a specialist. He said these are absolutely crucial for your cognitive health. Brain food, Dad. It'll help clear up that confusion you've been having." Confusion. I stared right back at her. I knew exactly what day it was. I knew the exact weight capacity of the steel support beam running directly over her head. I wasn't the one who was confused. I picked up the cup and caught a faint whiff of the pills. Decades of forensic auditing had trained me to notice every single detail, including fake asset valuations. And this was no different. The blue capsule had a bitter, distinctly metallic scent. It wasn't a vitamin. It was some kind of benzodiazepine derivative, the stuff they use to sedate agitated patients in a psych ward. They were drugging me. They wanted me compliant, quiet, and drooling. I looked up. Chloe was watching me like a hawk, her hands clasped in front of her, waiting. If I refused, she'd just call Derek downstairs. He'd force it down my throat. Or worse, they'd call their crooked doctor, claim I was refusing my medication, and use it as even more proof that I was incompetent. I had to play the part. "Thank you, Chloe," I said, forcing my hand to mimic a slight tremor. "Thank you for taking care of me." I popped the pills into my mouth, but I didn't swallow. I slipped them right under my tongue, an old trick I'd learned years ago. I took a massive gulp of orange juice, choking it down dramatically as if the pills were stuck in my throat. "Good job," she said, patting my shoulder like I was a golden retriever. "Go ahead and eat. I'll be back for the tray in a bit." She turned around, her heels clicking back up the stairs, and locked the door behind her. The very second the deadbolt clicked into place, I rushed over to the small utility sink in the corner. I spat the pills into my hand. The blue capsule was already starting to dissolve, leaving a nasty, bitter film on my tongue. I cracked the faucet open just a tiny bit to avoid making noise, rinsed my mouth out completely, and scraped my tongue clean with my teeth. If I had swallowed those, I would have been out cold within 20 minutes, waking up groggy and completely disoriented. Exactly what they wanted. I used the heel of my boot to crush the pills into a fine powder, washed it down the drain, and ate the paste like oatmeal. I needed the calories for what was coming. 2 hours later, the heavy door swung open again. This time, Chloe had changed into a glamorous outfit, and she was carrying a ring light and a phone tripod. "Come on, Dad," she said, gesturing for me to get up. "Let's get you over to this chair." She pointed to an old wooden chair in the center of the room. She set up the tripod, mounted her phone, and turned on the ring light. The blinding white glare nearly took my eyes out. "What is all this?" I asked, squinting against the light. "We're just going to say hello to some friends," she whispered, her voice instantly dropping into a soft, nurturing tone. "Just play along, Dad, and try not to look so angry. You'll scare people." She tapped a button on her phone, and her entire face transformed instantly. She suddenly looked exhausted, saintly, a martyr carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Hey, guys," she murmured into the camera, her voice trembling. "Welcome back to our Alzheimer's journey. I know I missed yesterday's update, but things have been so incredibly hard. As you know, we had to move my dad in with us yesterday. His dementia is just progressing so much faster than we ever expected." The sheer brilliance of the lie was almost impressive. She was building a completely fictional narrative, brick by brick, right in front of me. "Yesterday was pretty terrifying," she continued, casting a frightened glance in my direction. "He became aggressive. He didn't even recognize Derek. He thought we were trying to steal his house. We just want to protect him from hurting himself. But the cost of this kind of around-the-clock care is astronomical. Guys, if you can help at all, the link is in my bio. Every little bit helps us keep Arthur safe." She panned the camera over to me. "Say hi, Dad," she choked out, her voice cracking with fake emotion. "Do you know who I am?" I looked straight into the black lens of the phone. On the screen, I could see the comments flying by at lightning speed, hearts and crying emojis popping up in a relentless stream. People were eating it up. They saw a confused old man in a basement and a devoted, saintly daughter. I could have screamed. I could have yelled that she was a liar and a thief. But that's exactly what an aggressive, unhinged dementia patient would do. It would only prove her point. So I made a choice. I decided to give her the performance of a lifetime. I let my jaw go slack. I widened my eyes, letting them get watery and unfocused. I even let a bit of drool gather at the corner of my mouth. I looked at her, not with anger, but with a heartbreaking, confused adoration. "Eleanor," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Eleanor, is that you? You came back." Chloe froze, completely caught off guard. But then she realized this was absolute content gold for her followers. A greedy spark flared in her eyes. "Oh, Dad," she said, jumping right into the scene and giving me an awkward staged hug. "It's Chloe, remember? Mom's been gone a long time." "No, Eleanor." I reached up a trembling hand to touch her face, dragging a rough finger across her perfect makeup. "You look just like her. Did you make the pot roast?" On the screen, the comments section exploded. People started sending virtual gifts, the kind that cost real money to buy. "Poor old man, she's an absolute angel. God bless you, Chloe." She stepped back, giving the camera a sad, brave smile. "You see, guys, this is what we deal with every single day. It's heartbreaking, but we love him. We'll do whatever it takes. Thank you so much for the gifts. You guys are amazing." She cut the live stream. Instantly, the mask slipped. The sad smile vanished, replaced by a triumphant, ugly smirk. "Perfect," she muttered, checking the analytics on her screen. $2,000 in 10 minutes. "Keep acting crazy, old man. It pays the bills." She was so utterly absorbed in her screen, counting the money, that she didn't even notice me stand up. Her back was to me as she walked toward the stairs. She needed both hands to adjust the tripod, so she set her phone down on top of the laundry machine next to the stairs, just for a split second. She was arrogant. She was completely confident that the drugs had kicked in and turned my brain to mush. I moved like a shadow. Decades of auditing hidden ledgers had taught me how to walk without making a single sound. I reached the laundry machine and glanced down at the screen. The phone hadn't locked yet, and it was sitting on her messaging app. A banner notification popped up right at the top. It was from Stephen Yoga. The text read, "Is the zombie old man asleep yet? Thinking about you tonight. That idiot Derek won't suspect a thing. As soon as the cash clears, we're heading to Dubai." My stomach dropped. Stephen, the yoga instructor. The text was incredibly explicit, disrespectful, and completely damning. She wasn't just stealing my money and my house. She was cheating on the husband who had literally sold his soul to satisfy her material greed. Derek was a criminal, but he was also a colossal fool. I slipped my hand into my jacket and pulled out the Nokia. Before the banner notification disappeared, I snapped a picture of the screen. The image was a little grainy, but entirely legible. I slid the Nokia back into its hidden pocket and retreated to my chair just as Chloe turned around. "All right, old man," she said, grabbing her phone without even looking at me. "Stay put. I've got to go edit this video. Don't make a sound." She opened the door and walked upstairs, locking me in the semi-darkness once again. I sat there listening to the click of the deadbolt. My anger felt different now. This wasn't just about a house or money anymore. This was about the sheer layers of betrayal. She was using me for sympathy to scam money out of strangers. She was drugging me to keep me quiet, and she was betraying Derek, while Derek was betraying me. It was a massive house of cards built entirely on a foundation of lies and greed, and I had just found the exact thread that would pull the entire structure down. I felt the warmth of the Nokia pressed against my chest. I had the photos. I had the leverage. Now I just needed the perfect moment to use it. I leaned back against the wall and closed my eyes, mapping out a precise liquidation blueprint in my head. You don't blow everything up all at once. You weaken the supports, drill the holes, and place the charges. Then, when everything is perfectly lined up, you press the detonator. I wasn't a prisoner locked in a basement anymore. I was a saboteur inside their walls, and they had absolutely no idea. In the dead silence of the basement, my mind drifted back to the 90s. Before I stepped back from the front lines, I was sitting in a high-rise conference room in Dallas, holding a fraudulent audit report that was about to completely dismantle a Fortune 500 giant. Over the course of my career, I had tracked hundreds of millions of dollars in dirty money. Derek thought I was just some retired employee living off a meager pension. He saw the rusty truck and the worn flannel shirts and assumed I was clip-saving coupons at the grocery store. He had absolutely no idea that every single time I uncovered hidden capital in an auditing war, every time I completely dismantled a Ponzi scheme as an expert witness in a courtroom, I was paid handsomely. And every single dollar went straight into a blind trust in Delaware. For 30 years, that money had accumulated quietly, invisibly, like silt at the bottom of a river. I never touched it. I lived off my base salary because I wanted to teach my daughter the true value of money. I wanted her to build a life on her own merit, not stand around acting entitled on top of my wealth. Now I realize my mistake. I hid the money so well that they thought I was worthless. I taught Chloe that I was a man of modest means, so she treated me with zero respect. She had no clue she had just locked a man with a multi-million-dollar net worth in her basement. And Derek had even less of a clue that the old man he planned to discard like garbage could have bought out his shell company and bankrupted him 10 times over before breakfast. The sharp twist of the door handle snapped me back to reality. The door flew open and a flood of light poured down the stairs, blinding me for a split second. Derek came heavy-footing it down the steps, bringing a suffocating cloud of expensive cologne and stale anxiety along with him. He was still wearing yesterday's suit, but it looked completely wrinkled now. He threw a bundle of clothes right at my chest. It hit me with a dull thud. "Change into these," he commanded, his voice tight with stress. I unrolled the clothes. It was a pair of stained sweatpants with holes in the knees and a t-shirt that smelled like mildew and old sweat. They were rags, the kind of clothes even a donation bin would reject. Why? I asked, tossing them onto the mattress. Because Dr. Vance is coming by at 4 this afternoon for a follow-up, Derek said, pacing the small room like a caged animal. He needs to see your condition deteriorating. You need to look the part, Arthur. You aren't that respected accountant anymore. You're a senile old man who wets himself and can't remember his own name. He stopped pacing and glared at me with pure disgust. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out my wallet, an old, genuine leather bifold with frayed edges. He flipped it open and yanked out the cash inside. $40. He let out a short, barking laugh that echoed off the concrete walls. $40, Arthur. This is all you have to show for it. A lifetime of playing it safe, counting pennies, fixing your own roof, and for what? You're broke. You're old. And now you're staying in my basement wearing my garbage. He threw the bills onto the floor like they were infected. You're pathetic. I looked at the bills on the floor. I didn't reach down to pick them up. I just looked at my son-in-law, standing there in an Italian suit I knew damn well was bought on maxed-out credit cards, mocking $40 earned with honest labor. You measure a man's worth by his wallet, Derek, I said softly. That's why your soul is completely hollow. He took a step forward, his face twisting into a snarl. Don't lecture me, old man. You don't have the right. You're the failure here, not me. I'm making big moves. I just sold a property for $1.5 million in cash. What have you done lately besides drool? He didn't wait for an answer. He kicked the mattress hard, sending a cloud of dust swirling through the light. Put the rags on, he ordered. If you aren't wearing them when I bring the doctor down, I'll make you regret it. And don't try any funny business. Dr. Vance is on my payroll, and he's only going to see what I pay him to see. He turned and stormed back up the stairs, slamming the door hard. The electronic lock engaged with a heavy click. I waited until his footsteps faded out in the kitchen above, and then I stood up. I folded the ragged clothes neatly and placed them on the chair. I'd put them on later. I could play his game for now. But tonight, the rules of the game were going to change completely. I walked over to the tiny ventilation window high up on the wall. The window was covered by a metal grate and a thick layer of grime. Earlier that afternoon, while Chloe was busy editing her video, I'd found a loose nail behind the laundry machine and used it to scrape away at the screws holding the grate in place. After hours of patient, silent scraping, the rust finally gave way. I climbed up onto the washing machine and pushed up against the grate. It loosened, swinging outward to reveal a sliver of the night sky and the overgrown bushes of the backyard. The opening was incredibly narrow, but I had always kept a lean frame. I pulled off my heavy canvas jacket and pushed it through the gap first. Then I pulled myself up. The rough concrete scraped against my ribs, a sharp jolt of pain reminding me that I was very much alive. I exhaled completely, collapsing my chest, and wriggled through the tight space, my shoulders rubbing against the sides of the walls. When I tumbled out and landed in the dirt behind a hydrangea bush, the air smelled like wet grass and car exhaust. It was the smell of freedom. I threw my jacket back on and checked my pockets. The Nokia and the notebook were perfectly safe. Keeping low, I moved through the shadows of the yard, avoiding the motion sensor lights. I had analyzed the layout of the security system from the moment I first arrived. It was a cheap system put in by someone cutting corners, just like everything else in Derek's life. I slipped past the side gate and walked 2 full blocks before I dared to check my phone. There was a text from Marcus, Waffle House parking lot off the highway. Midnight. It was a 20-minute walk. My legs were protesting, but the adrenaline was pumping, keeping the fatigue buried deep. I pulled up my collar and kept my head down, looking exactly like an old, homeless man wandering the night. Derek was right about one thing. I certainly looked the part. I spotted Marcus's Chevy truck, parked under a flickering streetlight, in the corner of the lot. The truck was solid and reliable, just like him. He was sitting in the driver's seat, smoking a cigarette, the cherry glowing red in the dark. I yanked open the passenger door and climbed in. Marcus looked me up and down, narrowing his eyes. "You look like you just crawled out of hell, Arthur," he grunted, blowing out a stream of smoke. "I feel like it too," I replied. "Do you have it?" Marcus reached under his seat and pulled out a heavy object, wrapped in an oily cloth, handing it over. I unwrapped it. A snub-nosed .38 special revolver. Cold, heavy, and fully loaded. It was registered to Marcus, completely legal, but entirely untraceable to me. Don't use it unless you absolutely have to, Marcus said, his voice deadly serious. This isn't a war zone, Arthur. Sure feels like one, I said, tucking the gun into the waistband of my pants against the small of my back. And there's this, Marcus added, handing me a thick manila envelope. I opened it under the dome light, my eyes scanning the documents. My forensic auditor brain processed the data faster than I could read the words. It was a financial autopsy of my son-in-law. Derek wasn't just in debt, he was drowning. He had leveraged his Westlake Hills home 3 times over, and the final loan was from a private lender, the kind of operation that breaks your kneecaps if you don't pay on time. He had maxed out 11 credit cards. His crypto trading accounts were entirely empty. But the most devastating document was right at the bottom, a bank foreclosure notice dated 2 weeks ago. He's got 30 days, Arthur, Marcus said, blowing a cloud of smoke toward the windshield. The bank is taking his house. Everything he owns is leveraged to the hilt. The cars, the furniture, even the suit on his back. It's all leased or on credit. I stared at the paperwork. The deficit was staggering. Derek owed nearly $2 million in total. The $1.5 million from selling my ranch wasn't a windfall. It was a drop in the bucket. It was just enough to pay off the Miami thugs, but it wouldn't save his house. He needs more, I whispered, finally realizing the full scope of his desperation. He needs everything. Yeah, Marcus confirmed. He needs your trust, your pension, every single asset you have just to keep the lights on for another 6 months. He's not trying to get rich, Arthur. He's trying to stay out of a prison cell or a morgue. I looked out the window at the highway. Cars flying past, completely oblivious to the destruction brewing inside this truck. My son-in-law was a total failure, a man who had been given every opportunity and advantage, only to squander it all, to maintain a fake hologram of success. He thinks I'm a burden, I said quietly. He thinks I'm the one dragging him down. Marcus flicked his cigarette butt out the window, watching the sparks die on the asphalt. He's backed into a corner, Arthur. People in corners are dangerous. If he finds out you have money, real money, he won't just keep you in a basement. He'll kill you for it. I know, I said, feeling the notebook inside my jacket. I know. I looked back down at the foreclosure notice. A liquidation plan was taking shape in my mind. A structural demolition that required precise timing and absolute ruthlessness. He needs money, right? I looked over at Marcus. He's desperate for a lifeline. Exactly. Then I'm going to give him one. My lips curled into a cold, hard smile. I'm going to give him exactly what he's been dreaming of, and then it's going to crush him completely. I shoved the documents back into the envelope and opened the door. Drive me back, Marcus. Drop me off a block away. I need to be back in that cage before sunrise. You're going back in there? Marcus asked, staring at me in disbelief. Back into the cage? I'm not a prisoner anymore, Marcus, I said, stepping out into the cool night air. I'm a Trojan horse. I slipped back through the shadows, retracing my steps to the mansion. Derek wanted to play financial games, treating people like columns of assets and liabilities. Fine. I was going to show him what a real liability looked like. I wriggled back through the ventilation window and dropped quietly onto the washing machine. I pushed the grate back into position, tightening the loose screws just enough to hold it in place, but leaving it loose enough to pop open whenever I needed. I pulled off my canvas jacket and hid the revolver, the burner phone, and the manila envelope deep inside the torn lining of an old sofa rotting in the corner. By the time I lay back down on the mattress, the eastern sky was already fading into a dull, chalky gray. I was completely exhausted. Every muscle in my body was screaming for food and rest, but a strange, absolute calm washed over me. In a few hours, Derek would come down those stairs expecting to find a broken, hallucinating old man. Instead, he was going to find a gold mine, the heavy electronic lock engaged with a harsh, metallic crack that bounced off the hollow concrete walls like a gunshot. I was already sitting upright on the edge of the mattress, my hands resting flat on my knees, waiting. Time down here was measured entirely by the warden's visits. Derek came heavy-footing it down the steps, bringing that same suffocating cloud of expensive cologne and stale anxiety along with him. He was carrying a plastic bowl covered in plastic wrap and a single bottle of water. "Here, Arthur," he said, not even glancing in my direction as he tossed the food onto the laundry machine. "Eat up. I've got a crazy busy day today, so I don't have time to play sitters with you." He turned on his heel to leave, his movements frantic and wired. He was a man running out of time. The foreclosure notice I'd read the night before was ticking away in his pocket, like a time bomb he couldn't defuse. "Derek?" I said. My voice wasn't the raspy, broken murmur I'd used for his wife's camera. It was the deep, commanding baritone of a man who used to make top-tier Wall Street auditors sweat through their custom suits. It was the voice of his father-in-law. He froze, his hand hovering over the handrail. Slowly he turned around, his brow furrowing deep with confusion. "What did you say?" he asked, squinting through the dim, dusty light. I said, "Look at me, boy." I stood up slowly, drawing my 6-foot frame up to its full height. No hunching, no shaking. I locked my eyes onto his, channeling every ounce of authority I possessed. Derek instinctively took a step back, a flicker of genuine panic crossing his face. "Did you take your pills? Chloe said you took them. You're supposed to be resting." "I am perfectly fine, Derek. In fact, my head hasn't been this clear in months." I took a step toward him. I could see his eyes darting toward the stairs, calculating if he could make a run for it and lock the door before I reached him. But curiosity, and a desperate, ugly shred of hope, kept him rooted to the spot. He was praying I was about to say something that could save him. "I had a moment of clarity last night," I lied, keeping my tone smooth and incredibly convincing. Maybe it was the shock of the move, or maybe the fog just lifted for a second. But I remembered something very important. Derek crossed his arms, trying to salvage whatever dominance he had left. "What the hell are you talking about? Go back to sleep, Arthur. You're hallucinating." "I'm not hallucinating," I said, leaning casually against the washing machine. I remembered the safe deposit box. Derek scoffed. "You don't have a safe deposit box, Arthur. We ran your social security number. We checked all your accounts. You've got a checking account with $2,000 in it, and a pension that barely covers groceries. Don't waste my time." "Not my safe deposit box," I corrected him calmly. "Eleanor's." The mention of Eleanor made him freeze. He knew his late mother-in-law had always been a prepper, the kind of old-school woman who hid cash in coffee cans and under mattresses, always preparing for a rainy day. "Mom?" His voice lost its aggressive edge. "What about Mom?" Before the market took a hit back in '92, she was incredibly paranoid about the economy. "She didn't trust the banking system," I said, keeping my eyes locked onto his face, watching the greed slowly wake up in his eyes. "So she bought a massive block of gold certificate receipts and bearer bonds, the kind that belong to whoever holds them physically." I watched his breathing stop. I could almost hear his pulse skyrocketing through the silence. "Bonds?" he repeated. "How much?" I rubbed my chin, putting on a show of deep concentration, pretending to push through non-existent mental cobwebs. She put them in a safe deposit box at the old First National branch downtown, the one with the massive marble pillars. Back then it was worth about $500,000. With the interest accrued over 30 years, well, you do the math. 500 grand. The number hung in the humid air like a magic spell. Derek's mouth opened just a fraction. It was the exact amount he needed, enough to pay off the bloodthirsty sharks in Miami, enough to stall the bank's foreclosure, enough to keep his hollow illusion of success alive for another year. He licked his dry lips, his eyes wide. "Are you sure, Arthur? Are you absolutely sure it was 500,000? I nodded solemnly. "That's why I never spent money recklessly, Derek. That was our safety net, meant for Chloe and your future. But after Eleanor passed, I just didn't have the heart to open that box. It was too painful. Eventually, I forgot all about it. Until last night." Derek lunged forward and grabbed my shoulders, his grip incredibly tight, filled with pure desperation. "Is this real, Dad? Tell me this is real. Don't screw with me. It's real, son, I said, looking him dead in the eye, delivering a massive lie with the chilling composure of a sociopath. It's just sitting there waiting. But you know how those old-school boxes work. You need the physical key, and I have to sign for it in person. Derek let go of me, frantically pacing back and forth across the small room, running his fingers through his hair. He let out a breathless, borderline hysterical laugh. "Oh my God," he muttered. "This changes everything. 500 grand. He yanked out his phone, his thumb flying across the screen. "Chloe, get down here right now," he barked into the receiver. "Don't ask questions. Get your ass down to the basement immediately." He hung up and looked at me with a completely transformed expression. It wasn't love, and it wasn't respect. It was the look of a starving dog staring at a piece of meat. I was valuable again. 2 minutes later, Chloe came stumbling down the stairs in her slippers. She had a silk sleep mask pushed up onto her forehead, her face twisted in annoyance. "What is it, Derek?" she complained, pulling her robe tight. "It smells like mildew down here. Why did you wake me up?" "Shut up and listen," Derek said, grabbing her by the arm. "Your dad remembered something. He says Mom left a safe deposit box full of bearer bonds, worth $500,000. Chloe stopped whining instantly. Her eyes widened, her brain rapidly processing the figure. She looked at Derek, then at me, her expression shifting from irritation to predatory focus in a heartbeat. "$500,000?" she breathed. "Is he lying? Is he having an episode?" "He's completely lucid. Look at him," Derek said. "He remembers the bank, the year. It makes perfect sense. Mom was always hiding money." Chloe stepped toward me, invading my space, smelling of expensive night cream. "Dad," she said, dropping her voice into that fake sweet tone she used for her videos. "Is this true? Is the money actually there?" "Yes, Chloe," I said, playing the part of the tired old father who just wanted to help his family. "It's right there. I want you two to have it. I don't need it anymore. Not down here." She let out a high-pitched squeal, jumping up to hug Derek. "We're saved!" she cried. "We can keep the house. We can go to the Maldives." "Oh, Derek, I knew we kept him around for a reason." She spoke about me like I was a stray dog she hadn't gotten around to putting down yet. All right, Derek said, pushing her off and trying to take control of the situation. "We need to move fast. The bank opens at 9. We need to get that box before the people in Miami call again." He turned back to me, his face intense and wired. "Where's the key, Dad? You said we need the key. Where is it?" I hesitated, intentionally stretching out the suspense. I rubbed my temples, pretending to battle the slow cognition of old age. "The key," I murmured, closing my eyes. "A small brass key. Mom hid it somewhere special. She said it had to be a place where no one would ever look, a safe place." "Think, Dad," Chloe urged, her nails digging into my arm. "Where is it? Is it in your wallet? We already went through your wallet." "Not in my wallet." I opened my eyes, letting a look of deep sadness wash over my face. "She stitched it into the lining of her favorite thing. She wanted to keep it close to her." "What thing?" Derek shook me. "What thing?" "The grandfather clock," I whispered. "The old oak grandfather clock with the hidden compartment at the bottom of the hall. She tucked it right behind the velvet backing of the pendulum." The room went completely dead silent. Derek's face drained of color, turning a chalky, horrific white. Chloe's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening with absolute terror. They looked at each other, sharing a silent, panicked scream. "The grandfather clock?" Derek's voice trembled. "Yes," I said, putting on a display of total innocent ignorance. "The one that was sitting in the main hallway the day you brought me here. Did you guys move it over? It must be in one of the boxes upstairs." Derek looked over at Chloe, panic rising up his throat like bitter bile. "Chloe," he managed to choke out. "The stuff from the old house. What the hell did you do with that clock?" I don't know," Chloe stammered, taking a step back. "I mean, it was so old and busted, Derek. It smelled like mildew. "Where is it?" Derek roared, grabbing her by the shoulders and shaking her violently. "Did you pack it up or not?" "No," she screamed, shoving him off. "I donated it. I gave it to a junk removal company. It was a hideous piece of junk. Why on earth would I keep that trash in my house? You donated it? Derek's voice cracked completely. You donated $500,000? I got rid of all the old junk. Chloe shrieked right back, hysterical. You're the one who told me to clear out the house, Derek. You're the one who rented that massive orange dumpster and called the haulers. Did you forget? Derek spun around to face me, his face a mask of absolute desperation. Dad, the junk company. Which one was it? I remained as calm as a frozen lake. I don't know, son. It was the people you called. But I think I heard them say it was heading down to that massive charity warehouse in San Marcos. San Marcos. That was a solid hour's drive away. A place overflowing with thousands of pieces of abandoned furniture from all over central Texas. Oh my God, Derek gasped, clutching his chest like he was on the verge of a heart attack. We have to go. We have to go right now. He snatched Chloe's hand, dragging her toward the stairs. Come on, move. But I haven't even changed, Chloe wailed. I'm still in my pajamas. I don't care, Derek screamed. Get in the car. We're going to that warehouse. We have to find that damned clock. They scrambled up the stairs, practically tripping over each other in a blur of greed and panic. I heard them sprint through the kitchen, keys jingling erratically, followed by the heavy slam of the front door. Seconds later, the Porsche's engine roared to life, the tires screeching as they tore out of the driveway. I stood completely alone in the basement, listening as silence settled over the space once again. They were gone. They were currently speeding across the county, ready to dive headfirst into a filthy warehouse full of discarded junk, all to dig through the wreckage of the very life they had destroyed. They were going to spend hours breathing in dust, rat droppings, and other people's garbage, looking for a key that didn't exist. There was no key. There was no gold trust. It was just a ghost story I had planted in their minds, a seed of greed that blossomed instantly. I walked over to the laundry machine, picked up the water bottle Derek had left behind, and took a long, refreshing drink. They would be gone for hours. That warehouse was massive, and to find a specific clock in that mountain of trash, they would have to tear apart every single piece of junk like rats. And while the wardens were away, the prison belonged to me. I walked over to the basement door. It was locked from the outside, of course, but that wasn't a problem anymore. I had analyzed the hinges yesterday. They were exterior hinges, cheap builder-grade hardware used on a hollow-core door for security isolation, the kind of mistake only an amateur makes. I pulled out the spoon I'd used to eat the oatmeal. It was thin metal, but the hinge pins were loose. I jammed the tip of the spoon under the head of the top pin and tapped it upward, using the heel of my boot. 1 pin, 2 pins, 3. The door loosened in its frame. I gave a gentle pull from the handle side, and the entire door swung backward, leaving the entryway wide open even though the deadbolt was still engaged. I stepped out of the basement and into the spacious kitchen. The house was dead quiet. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It looked like a normal home, a happy home, but I knew the rot underneath. I walked into the living room and found the liquor cabinet. On Derek's bar sat an open bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, a high-end vintage, easily worth a few $100s. I poured myself a generous glass. Then I sat down in Derek's expensive Italian leather recliner, kicked my mud-caked boots up onto the ottoman, and took a slow sip. The wine was excellent, rich, complex, oaky. I pulled out the Nokia and speed-dialed Marcus. They're gone, I said when he picked up, chasing ghosts down at the San Marcos warehouse. Perfect, Marcus chuckled. You have the run of the place, then. Yeah, I said, looking around at the lavish decor. Listen, Marcus, I need you to call the bank, not mine, the one holding the note on Derek's mortgage. Tell them you're an interested buyer who heard the property might be headed for a short sale or foreclosure. Find out what their timeline is. You're squeezing him dry, aren't you? Marcus asked. I'm going to liquidate him, I said, taking another sip of wine. 但首先，我要让他在垃圾堆里有上几个小时。他需要锻炼。But first, I'm going to let him swim in garbage for a few hours. He needs the exercise. I hung up, leaned back in the chair, and enjoyed the quiet. Right now, Derek and Chloe were probably tearing through dusty sofas, ruining their expensive clothes, screaming and blaming each other for ruining their future. They thought they were treasure hunting. They had no idea the actual demolition was just getting started. A documentary about the construction of the Hoover Dam was playing on the television. Concrete pouring, load distributions, the sheer force of human engineering. It was comforting. While my eyes were on the screen, my mind was 40 miles away in that warehouse. I didn't need security cameras to visualize the exact scene. Derek, in his $3,000 suit, now covered in mystery stains and cobwebs, digging through piles of broken furniture like a lunatic. As the temperature rose, the stench of mildew and rodent droppings would bake in the heat, soaking into their pores. Chloe's designer shoes would be stepping in unknown sludge, her manicured hands clawing at disgusting old wood. They were looking for a phantom 500 grand. In reality, they were just hunting for their own lost dignity, and they weren't going to find a damn thing. 4 hours later, close to noon, I heard the rough, frantic whine of the Porsche engine in the driveway. The car doors slammed so hard the front windows rattled. I didn't move. I stayed right there in the leather recliner, wine glass in hand, my eyes glued to the TV screen. The front door burst open. Along with the rush of air conditioning came a foul stench of heavy sweat, mildew, and rotting garbage. Derek stood in the entryway, looking barely human. His suit jacket was gone. His white shirt was torn at the shoulder and smeared with dark gray grime, and his slick-back hair was matted with sweat and filth. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving, his eyes bloodshot. Behind him, Chloe looked like a broken rag doll. The hem of her silk robe was shredded and caked in black mud. She was holding a broken stiletto in one hand. Her perfect makeup completely melted down her face in dirty streaked tracks of mascara. She was shaking. They both stared at me. They stared at the old man they had locked in a dark basement, now sitting in the master chair, drinking their wine, watching their TV. "Dad?" Chloe whispered, her voice cracked and trembling. "You're out." I slowly turned my head, looking them up and down with a hint of mild disgust. "You two smell horrific," I said calmly, taking a sip of the Cabernet. "Did you find the clock?" Derek let out a roar. A primal, animalistic sound of pure, unadulterated desperation. He charged across the living room, completely ignoring the fact that the wet mud on his boots was ruining his expensive Persian rug. "You old bastard!" He lunged at me. He grabbed the collar of my flannel shirt, yanking me forward so hard a few drops of wine spilled onto his floor. The adrenaline and rage gave him terrifying strength. "Where is it?" He screamed into my face, his breath smelling like sour bile. "Where is the money? You lied to us. There was no clock. We tore that whole goddamn warehouse apart. There was nothing." I didn't flinch. I looked him dead in the eye, my gaze as steady as a laser level. "I didn't lie to you, Derek," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I told you exactly where it was. You're the ones who threw it in the garbage." He shook me violently, his fingers digging into my chest. "It wasn't there," he yelled. "We checked every single piece of furniture. It's gone." "Then I guess it's gone," I said, shrugging as best I could in his iron grip. "That's a real shame. $500,000 vanished just because Chloe thought it was ugly." Chloe let out a wail from the doorway, dropping her broken shoe. "You did this on purpose," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You knew. You knew we threw it away. You sent us there just to humiliate us." I looked past Derek to her. "I sent you to find your inheritance," I said. "You're the ones who turned it into trash." Derek shoved me back into the chair with a vicious force. The wine glass slipped from my hand, shattering on the hardwood floor, the red liquid spreading across the beige rug like blood. "I should kill you right now," he panted, his hands balled into fists. "I should just end you." "Go ahead." I raised my chin, daring him. "Do it, Derek. But if you kill me, you'll never see a single cent of that money." He froze. His fist stopped midair. "What did you say?" His voice dropped. I patted down the wrinkles in my shirt. I said, "If I die, that money is lost forever." Derek lowered his hand, his eyes narrowing with deep suspicion. You said the bonds were in the clock. You said we lost them. I sighed, leaning back in the chair, putting on a show of total exhaustion, the look of an old man whose memory was failing like a dying candle. I might have gotten it confused, I mumbled, rubbing my temples. Sometimes things get scrambled. The fog comes and goes. Derek grabbed my arm again, less violently this time, desperation completely replacing his anger. What do you mean scrambled? Arthur, think! Think hard! I closed my eyes, pretending to fight the very dementia they claimed I had. The clock, I said slowly. The clock is where Eleanor hid the key. But the bonds? The bonds weren't in the clock. Then where are they? Derek shook my arm. Where are the bonds? I opened my eyes, hitting him with a sudden, razor-sharp look of pure clarity. The bank, I said. First National downtown. The safe deposit box is still there. The bonds have been locked in that vault the entire time, Derek. You know that's standard protocol. He stared at me, processing the information. A chaotic mix of emotions flickered across his filthy face. Confusion, massive relief, and then a fresh wave of boiling anger. But the key, he growled through gritted teeth. You said we needed the key. Yes, I nodded, or rather we used to. Derek ran his hands through his dirt-matted hair, leaving dark streaks across his forehead. What the hell are you talking about? Stop talking in riddles, old man. If a key is lost, I said, slowing my cadence as if explaining it to a toddler, I can go to the bank in person. I can sign a lost key affidavit. They'll bring in a locksmith to drill the lock. It costs about $100 in fees, but they'll open it. If you're there? Derek repeated. Yes, I said. But I have to be there physically with my ID, and I have to sign the paperwork myself. Derek looked over at Chloe. She had stopped crying entirely, staring at us with dollar signs practically flashing in her eyes again. He has to go to the bank, she whispered, stepping through the wet mud on the living room floor. He has to sign. Derek turned back to me, the gears in his head turning at a frantic pace. You'd really do that for us? He asked, suspiciously. I looked down at the red wine stains spreading across the rug, then back at the unraveling man standing in front of me. I want to help you, Derek, I lied, delivering the performance of my life. I don't want you to lose this house. I don't want to see you drowned in debt. Money is useless to me now anyway. I'm old. I just want peace. Peace? Derek scoffed. You want peace? Fine. We get the money, we pay off the mortgage, and you get your peace. You can stay down in this basement for the rest of your life, for all I care. He grabbed me by the arm, hoisting me out of the chair with a firm, controlling grip, though less violent than before. Get up, he ordered. We're going to the bank right now. I raised an eyebrow, looking at him up and down. Looking like that? You two look like you just crawled out of a sewer line. You can't exactly walk into a high-end private wealth bank downtown looking like a couple of vagrants. I sat in the passenger seat, a picture of perfect composure, watching the city pass by. I was the eye of the storm, the only stable point in their collapsing universe. When the car screeched into the driveway, Derek didn't even wait for the engine to die before throwing his door open. He sprinted around to my side, yanked my door open, and grabbed my arm with an iron grip. Get inside, he snarled, dragging me up the concrete steps. Get inside and initiate the transfer. I want to see the confirmation page. Chloe stumbled along behind us, her face pale with panic. We burst into the house, the cold air doing nothing to cut through the heavy layer of desperation radiating off Derek. He shoved me toward the kitchen island where his laptop was still open and humming. Do it now, he yelled, slamming his hand down on the marble countertop. Log in. Move the money. Every single dollar. I kept my movements slow, intentionally killing time, letting every second of hesitation grate on his frayed nerves. I pulled out a stool, sat down, and adjusted my flannel shirt. I looked at the screen, then raised my eyes to meet his. I can't do an instant transfer, Derek, I said, keeping my voice steady and practical. You know how large sum transactions work. It's $1.5 million. The bank has security protocols. They have to verify the source of the capital and the receiving routing numbers. Derek's face turned a violent shade of purple. He leaned over the counter, his breath smelling of stale coffee and fear. Don't give me that bureaucratic Garbage, old man. You said 24 hours. You said it would hit tomorrow morning. And it will, I lied, brushing a hand through my hair. The transfer is initiated, but it has to clear the federal ACH network. It takes time, Derek. It's completely out of my hands. He slammed his fist against the marble, sending a fruit bowl rattling across the counter. You better not be playing with me, you old bastard. If that money isn't in my account by noon tomorrow, I am going to lose my mind. Do you hear me? I lose everything. I hear you, son, I said quietly. I've done my part. The rest is up to the clearinghouse. He glared at me, searching for a tell, but I was a concrete wall. I gave him nothing but the defeated, exhausted expression of an old father. He let out a ragged groan of absolute frustration and spun around, grabbing his head in his hands. Right then his phone rang. It wasn't his normal ringtone. It was a harsh, jarring alert tone he had assigned to a specific contact. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him a sickly pale gray. He stared at the phone on the counter like it was a ticking bomb. "Answer it," Chloe whispered from the doorway, her voice shaking. "Answer it, Derek, or they're just going to show up here." Derek reached out a trembling hand and hit the speaker button. "Yeah," he croaked, his voice raw. "Where's my money, Derek?" A rough, bottom-heavy voice rumbled through the speaker, layered with a thick Eastern European accent. It was the voice of a man who made his living breaking bones. "I'm getting it, Ivan," Derek stammered, sweating bullets. "I swear to God the money is on the way. The transfer is processing." "Processing?" A dry, hollow chuckle came back over the line. "I cannot pay my boss's bills with processing, Derek. Yesterday you told me you sold your father-in-law's ranch. You said you had $1.5 million in cash in your hands." "I do! I sold it!" Derek yelled in pure desperation. "The money is right there. It's just locked up." "Locked up?" Ivan's voice dropped an octave, turning deadly quiet. "You are lying to me, Derek. I checked the public records. The transaction went through yesterday. The funds were released. Why would my money be locked up?" "I don't know," Derek cried out, lunging toward his laptop and frantically refreshing his banking portal. "There's a hold on it. I can see the 1.5 million deposit sitting right there on the screen. But the status says, under investigation. I don't know why." I sat on my stool, taking a slow sip of the water I'd poured earlier, watching the whole thing unfold. Of course I knew why. The exact second I used my shell corporation to wire the 1.5 million into his account, I had Evelyn flag the transaction from the sender's side as highly suspicious. I froze the funds from my end, trapping Derek in financial purgatory. "Listen to me, you little insect," the voice on the phone growled. "Your time runs out at midnight tonight. Not tomorrow morning, not tomorrow noon. Midnight. If I don't see 1.5 million hit my crypto wallet by 12 o'clock, I'm sending people over. And they aren't coming to talk. They're going to chop you into pieces, Derek. Literally into pieces." "Ivan, please," Derek sobbed, tears streaming down his face. "I just need 24 hours. My father-in-law just signed over some bonds. 500,000. It's hitting tomorrow, I swear. I don't give a damn about your father-in-law or his stupid bonds. Midnight, Derek, or I'll take your hands and use them to open your safe myself." The line went dead. Total suffocating silence filled the room. Derek stood there, staring at his phone, his chest heaving. He looked like a man who had just listened to his own death warrant. "Midnight," he muttered to himself. "Midnight." He spun back toward the computer, frantically pounding on the keyboard, refreshing the banking page over and over again. "Come on," he screamed at the monitor. "Clear! Clear, you piece of trash!" But the screen didn't change. Under investigation. The bright red warning text mocked him. The 1.5 million was right there in front of him, yet completely untouchable. It was a mirage in the desert. He could see it, but he could never drink from it. He snapped his head around to look at me, his eyes wild and unfocused. "Call the bank," he roared. "Call them and tell them to lift the hold. That's your land money. You're the seller. Tell them the transaction is legal." "I can't call them right now, Derek," I said, glancing at the clock on the microwave, completely calm. It's 5:30. The main branch is closed. The fraud department doesn't open until 9 tomorrow morning. No! Derek bellowed, sweeping his arm across the counter and sending the fruit bowl crashing to the floor. Apples and oranges scattered everywhere. No! 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 He dropped to his knees right in the middle of the kitchen, digging his fingers into his hair, and began to sob uncontrollably. It was a pathetic sight. A grown man forced to his knees, not by grief, but by sheer, unadulterated greed and terror. Chloe stood in the doorway, watching him. Her face was pale, but her eyes were calculating. She looked at Derek like he was a piece of meat that had already gone bad. She glanced at the clock, then looked toward the back door. "I'm leaving," she said softly. Derek stopped crying, raising his tear-streaked face, his eyes bloodshot and confused. "What?" "I'm leaving, Derek." Her voice hardened. She walked into the living room and snatched her luxury Birkin bag, the one bought with my money. She started shoving things inside, her phone, her car keys, and a thick wad of cash from the jar on the bar. "You can't leave!" Derek scrambled up on his hands and knees. "We're in this together, Chloe. We're a team." "Not anymore we aren't," she spat, not even looking at him. "Ivan said midnight, Derek. Did you hear him? He said he's going to chop you to pieces. I am not staying around to watch that. I am not letting them hurt me just because you're a broke gambler." She ran toward the front door, grabbing her coat. "Chloe, wait!" Derek chased her down, grabbing her arm with a desperate grip. "You can't do this. You spent that money too. You wanted this house. You wanted this luxury lifestyle. You're just as guilty as I am." "I didn't go to loan sharks," she screamed, spinning around to face him, tearing wildly at his grip. "I didn't lie to the mob. Let go of me, Derek. I'm going to Dubai." "You're not going anywhere," Derek yelled, his grip tightening so hard she gasped for air. "You're staying right here. We'll figure this out." "There is nothing to figure out," she shrieked, driving her French manicured nails deep into the back of his hand. "It's over. You're a dead man, Derek, and I am not dying with you. I'm filing for divorce." Divorce. The word hung heavily in the air. Something snapped in Derek's brain. The terror in his eyes vanished, replaced by a blind, white-hot rage. He yanked her back violently and threw her to the side. "You ungrateful bitch!" he roared, raising his hand and slapping Chloe across the face. The sound cracked loud and sharp, echoing through the high ceilings of the foyer. Chloe stumbled backward, clutching her cheek, her face a mask of utter shock. She stared at him for a single second, and then she let out a blood-curdling scream, lunging at him with her nails out, tearing at his face. They crashed to the floor, rolling around on the expensive rug like animals, ripping into each other. Derek was cursing. Chloe was screaming. I sat right there at the island, quietly drinking my water, watching my daughter and the man she chose tear each other to shreds on the floor of the house they stole from me. It was a scene of total degradation. The veneer of their high-class life was stripped away entirely, revealing the rot underneath. "Enough," I said, my deep voice cutting right through their noise. They froze, tangled together on the ruined rug, panting heavily. "Look at yourselves." I stood up, using the counter to steady myself as I walked over to them. "The two of you are pathetic." "相母, 친탄." Derek looked up at me, a bloody scratch running down his cheek. "Help us, Dad," he whispered, breaking down into desperation again, his voice weak. "Help us fix this." "I can't fix you, Derek," I said, looking down at him. "I can liquidate the most complex offshore trusts in the world. I can patch the holes in a corporate bankruptcy, but I cannot fix a soul that is completely rotted by greed." Chloe scrambled away from him, grabbing her bag and rushing out the front door. This time, Derek didn't try to stop her. She yanked the door open and vanished into the night, leaving the door wide open. Derek lay flat on his back, staring at the open doorway, completely broken. "She's gone," he muttered. "She actually left me." "She was never with you, son." I walked over, closed the door, and turned the deadbolt. "She was with the money, and now the money is gone." Derek sat up, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking violently as he wept. "I'm dead, Dad," he cried. "Ivan is going to kill me. Midnight. It's all over." I looked at the clock on the microwave. 6 o'clock. 6 hours left until his deadline. 6 hours until the final liquidation. I walked back into the kitchen and poured another glass of water. I took a sip. My hands were perfectly steady. "Get up, Derek," I commanded. He raised his swollen eyes to look at me. "Why?" "Because if you're going to die tonight, you're going to die on your feet," I said. "Besides, we have work to do." "What work?" he sniffled. "We're going to find you a way out." I delivered a cold, flawless lie. "But you have to do exactly what I say. No questions, no arguments. Can you do that?" He nodded slowly, grabbing onto my promise like a lifeline because he had absolutely no one else left to trust. "Yes, Dad. Anything. Just save me." I smiled to myself. The trap was set. The bait was swallowed. Now it was time to close the jaws. "Go wash your face." I pointed toward the downstairs bathroom. "We have a phone call to make, but before you go, give me your phone." He handed it over without a second thought, placing all his faith in me. I took the phone and glanced at the screen. The battery was low, but it would do. I had the evidence. I had the confession. Now I had the leverage. "Go on," I said. He dragged his feet as he walked away, looking like a death row inmate marching toward the gallows. I waited until the bathroom door clicked shut. Then, using his phone, I dialed a number. Not the bank and not the police. I called Evelyn. "It's time," I said when she picked up. "The house of cards has collapsed. Bring the hammer." I hung up, sat back down on my stool, and waited for my son-in-law to return. Prepared for judgment, day to land right on his doorstep. The sun had gone down hours ago, throwing the kitchen into an oppressive, heavy dimness that the recessed ceiling lights couldn't seem to cut through. The air conditioner hummed a low mechanical tune, completely failing to cool down the feverish heat radiating off my son-in-law. Derek paced erratically in front of the kitchen island, his soles squeaking sharply against the tile. He kept running his hands through his hair, a frantic, repetitive motion. He looked like a man whose soul was being eaten away from the inside out. The digital clock on the microwave read 7:15 p.m. Less than 5 hours remained until the mob's deadline. I sat at the dining table, taking my time with the water I'd poured earlier, coldly watching him unravel. It was exactly like watching a corporate financial structure implode under pressure. The stress fractures spread across the surface until the entire building is ready to collapse. Suddenly, Derek stopped pacing. He spun around to face me, his eyes wide, his pupils glassy and hollow, completely wired on a mix of pure panic and adrenaline. He strode over to the junk drawer, the one where they kept takeout menus and spare batteries, and yanked it open so hard the track screeched, dumping the contents everywhere. He scavenged frantically through the mess until he found what he was looking for, a heavy-duty roll of gray duct tape. He marched back over to me, ripping off a long strip with a sharp, grating shriek. "Put your hands on the armrests," he commanded, his voice trembling under the extreme tension. I looked at him calmly, not moving an inch. "What are you doing, Derek?" "Do it!" he screamed, lunging forward. He grabbed my left wrist, slamming it down against the heavy oak armrest, and began wrapping the tape around it, tight enough to cut off my circulation. He did the exact same thing to my right wrist, and then my ankles, binding me securely to the heavy piece of furniture. I didn't fight back. I could have. I could have broken his nose with a headbutt, or shattered his kneecap with a kick. But I needed him to cross the line completely. I needed him at the absolute end of a dead-end road. So I let him tie me down. I let him turn his own father-in-law into a hostage in his own home. When he finished, he stepped back, panting heavily. He reached for the small of his back and pulled a gun. It was a cheap, black Glock replica, the kind of sketchy piece you buy out of a trunk in a dark alley, a low-tier burner prone to jamming. He pointed the barrel straight at my head. His hand was shaking so violently that the gun was practically dancing in the air. "Transfer the money!" he roared, spit flying onto my cheek. "Transfer it right now, Arthur. Give me the password. Give me the security phrase." I looked at the gun, then up at his face. I saw the young man I had taught how to tie a double Windsor knot. I saw the guy who had stood in a tailored suit and promised me he would take care of Chloe. And I saw the pathetic gambler standing in front of me now, ready to blow my brains out to fix a ledger shortfall. "You don't want to do this, son," I said, my voice low and steady, slicing through the quiet kitchen. "Put the gun down." "I will kill you!" Derek shrieked, pressing the cold metal barrel directly between my eyes. "I swear to God, Arthur, if you don't give me that money, I will paint this kitchen with your brains. Ivan is going to kill me anyway. I have nothing left to lose. Give me the money." The pressure against my forehead was a cold, rigid reality. In my head, I calculated the angles. If he pulled the trigger, the round would tear through my frontal lobe, severing every neural pathway that made me who I am. It would be over fast, a sudden plunge into total darkness. But I looked into his eyes, and all I saw was terror, no resolve. He was a coward, a greedy, desperate coward. And cowards only pull the trigger when they have absolutely no other choice. I let out a soft chuckle. It started deep in my chest, turning into a genuine low laugh that vibrated against the chair I was taped to. Derek pulled the gun back an inch, confusion and fury warring across his face. "What the hell is so funny?" he screamed hysterically. "You're about to die." I stopped laughing and locked my eyes onto his, channeling every ounce of authority I had built over 68 years of life. "Do you want to know where the money is, Derek?" I whispered, my voice dropping into a tone that felt like a massive revelation. "Do you want to know where that $1.5 million from the ranch went?" He stared at me, his gun hand still trembling. "Yes. Where is it? Is it in the trust? Is it in the goddamn bonds?" "It's in my pocket," I said with a cold smile. "It's been in my pocket the entire time." Derek blinked, his brow furrowing as the barrel lowered just a fraction. "What the hell are you talking about? You're tied up. You don't have $1.5 million in your pocket." I sighed, leaning my head back against the chair. "I am the buyer, Derek." My words hung in the air like smoke. "I am Apex Holdings, the company that bought the ranch, the developer you thought offered you that cash deal. That's me. That was my money." Derek froze. His brain tried to process the data, trying to force this new piece into the puzzle of his reality. "You—" He shook his head, his voice dropping to a whisper. "No, that's impossible. You're broke. You're just a retired accountant." "I am a retired forensic auditor with a blind trust that controls 3 of the largest offshore whistleblower bounty funds in the country." My voice hit him like granite. "I pull $3 million a year in interest alone, Derek. I've been making $3 million a year since Chloe was in diapers. I hid it because I wanted my daughter to build a life on her own merit. I wanted you to be a real man, not a trust fund parasite looking for a handout." He staggered backward, the gun dropping to his side, his mouth hanging half open. "You have tens of millions," he gasped. "You have tens of millions, and you just watched me struggle? You watched me drown with these loan sharks?" "I watched you live," I corrected him. "I gave you a starting point. I funded your company's seed round. And what did you do? You embezzled it. You shorted crypto. You bought sports cars and custom suits you couldn't afford to impress Silicon Valley investors who didn't give a damn about you. And when you got into trouble, you didn't come to me like a man and confess. You tried to steal my home. You tried to bury me in a basement. You tried to drug me." "I didn't have a choice," Derek yelled, his voice raw and defensive. "I was desperate." "And I knew you were desperate," I said. "So I set a trap. I knew you were going to sell the ranch. I had Marcus watch you. I had Evelyn set up the Shell Corporation. I approved the purchase agreement. I used my own money to buy back my own land from you, Derek, just to see how far you would go, just to see if you actually had the guts to forge my signature on that power of attorney." Derek snapped his head around to look at the laptop on the counter, where the banking portal still read, "Under investigation." "So the money is real?" A tiny sliver of hope flared in his eyes, fragile like a candle in the wind. "It's sitting there?" "I wired the funds. It's there," I nodded. "But there's one thing you have to understand about that money, Derek." I leaned forward, straining against the duct tape, locking my gaze onto his. "You sold a property that didn't belong to you. You used a power of attorney, signed under duress, based on a fraudulent medical diagnosis. That renders the bill of sale null and void. It invalidates the transaction, and it constitutes federal wire fraud." Derek turned a deadly, chalky white, the blood completely leaving his face until he looked like a ghost. "Wire fraud?" he whispered. "Federal wire fraud," I clarified, "and because I knew exactly what you were going to do, I notified the SEC and the FBI this morning, before we ever went to the bank. I told them everything. The Miami Sharks, the forged documents, your Ponzi scheme. And I told them I was about to wire $1.5 million into your account as evidence for a sting operation." I paused, letting the sheer weight of my words crush him completely. "That money, Derek, the money sitting in your account right now, it's marked. It's federal evidence. The exact millisecond it touched your ledger, the jaws of the trap snapped shut. You didn't just rob your father-in-law. You accepted the proceeds of a criminal enterprise monitored by the United States government. You're holding dirty money for money laundering, son, and the people coming to collect tonight aren't the loan sharks from Miami. It's federal agents." The gun slipped from Derek's hand. It hit the tile floor with a sharp, hollow metallic clack, turning into a useless piece of scrap metal. Derek stumbled backward, his legs giving out completely. He slid down the front of the refrigerator, hitting the floor, and buried his face in his hands. "The FBI?" He rocked back and forth, groaning in sheer agony. "You called the FBI on your own son-in-law. The night you locked me in a dungeon, you stopped being my son-in-law." My voice held zero mercy. "You became a criminal, and criminals go to prison." "But Ivan!" Derek looked up, his face covered in tears, his features distorted by absolute terror. "Ivan is going to kill me if I don't pay by midnight. He's going to chop me to pieces." I looked up at the clock. It was 7:30 p.m. "You better pray the feds get here before Ivan does," I said quietly. "Because as far as you're concerned, a federal holding cell is the safest place on earth right now." Derek stared at me, his eyes filled with a look of pure, unadulterated betrayal. "How could you do this?" he whispered. "How could you do this to me?" "I didn't do anything to you, Derek." I closed my eyes, a profound, heavy exhaustion suddenly washing over me. It was the massive emptiness that comes after a definitive victory. "You did this to yourself. I just handed you the shovel." The room plunged into absolute silence. There was nothing but the low hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my son-in-law sobbing on the floor. I sat there, bound to the chair, quietly waiting for the sirens to start, waiting for the hammer to fall. My heart was heavy, but my ledger was clean. My foundation was solid, and my son-in-law's house of cards was finally meeting the tide. The silence in the kitchen stretched out, taut like a rubber band right before it snaps. Derek was still curled up on the tile floor, rocking back and forth, muttering to himself like a lunatic about midnight deadlines and broken legs. I sat tied to that heavy oak chair, watching the microwave clock count down the seconds. The air conditioner hummed its low, indifferent tune, drowning out the sound of the engines turning onto our street, but I knew they were coming. Evelyn was a woman of her word, and she knew federal banking laws better than anyone. The second I authorized a massive transfer of funds from a shell company into a flagged personal account, the alarms went off straight inside the FBI field office. This wasn't a domestic dispute anymore. This was high-level federal wire fraud across state lines. And with that kind of money, they don't just send a squad car. They bring the heavy artillery. Suddenly, the front yard lit up like a movie set. Blue and red strobes cut through the dark, reflecting off the kitchen windows like a twisted nightmare disco. Then the megaphone crackled to life, a booming, amplified voice cutting through the house. "Federal agents, FBI, step outside with your hands up." Derek stopped rocking. His eyes snapped wide open, and for a split second, a look of pure relief washed over his face. He actually thought the cops were here to protect him from the mob. He thought his rescue party had arrived to put him in a nice, safe holding cell far away from Ivan's blades. "Thank God," he whispered, scrambling to his feet, tripping over his own exhausted legs. "It's the police, Dad. The police are here." He ran toward the front foyer, waving his arms like a madman. "I'm in here," he screamed. "I'm in here. Help me." He never even got the chance to touch the doorknob. There was a deafening boom, a shockwave that rattled the floorboards under my feet. The expensive front door Chloe had picked out for its looks, rather than its security, shattered inward under thousands of pounds of pressure from a battering ram. Splinters flew like shrapnel. Glass exploded, and the foyer was instantly filled with flashbang smoke and the heavy thud of combat boots. "Get down! Federal agents, on the ground!" Tactical gear-clad agents flooded the hallway, assault rifles drawn, blinding tactical lights cutting through the haze. They moved through the rooms like a well-oiled machine, clearing corners and shouting orders. Derek froze in the hallway, completely paralyzed by the sudden, violent assault. He had been expecting a patrol car and a polite knock. Instead, he got a SWAT team. "Get on the ground!" a voice roared. Derek threw his hands up, squinting against the lights. "Don't shoot! My father-in-law, he's the one who—" A hand clad in a black tactical glove grabbed the collar of Derek's ruined luxury shirt and slammed him face first into the wall. The impact knocked the wind right out of his lungs. He slid down the drywall, leaving a streak of dirt and sweat behind him. "Clear! Kitchen clear!" An agent stepped into the kitchen, rifle raised. He took one look at me taped to the chair, the gray duct tape gleaming in his flashlight beam. "Hostage secured," the agent barked into his radio. "Get medevac in here." 2 agents stepped forward, tactical knives drawn. With practiced efficiency, they sliced through the tape, freeing my wrists and ankles. The blood rushed back into my hands, a burning, prickling sting. I rubbed my wrists, watching the absolute chaos systematically dismantle my son-in-law's pristine mansion. They dragged Derek back into the kitchen, forcing him face down onto the tile. An agent jammed a knee into his spine, while another looped heavy zip ties around his wrists. "You have the right to remain silent," an agent began, reciting the Miranda rights in a cold, monotone voice. I stood up, my legs a little shaky, but solid. The agent who had freed me offered a hand. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked, looking at the raw marks on my skin. "Do we need to call EMS?" "I'm fine," I said, my voice raspy. "I just want a word with my son-in-law." I walked over to Derek, who was pinned flat against the floor, his face pressed sideways against the cold tile, his eyes darting around wildly. He looked up, seeing me standing over him, free and completely unharmed, while he lay there in plastic cuffs. "You!" he shrieked, blood spitting from his cracked lip. "You did this! You set me up!" I looked down at him, feeling a deep, profound hollowness, where my heart used to be. "I didn't set you up, Derek," I said softly. "I just called the audit. You set yourself up the second you tried to sell something that didn't belong to you." "It was a trap," he screamed, thrashing against the zip ties. "The money! It was a trap!" "It was a test," I corrected him, "and you failed." "Search him," the team leader ordered. An agent went to work on Derek, patting down his pockets and waistband. He pulled out a wallet, keys, and then his hand paused at the small of Derek's back. "Weapon!" the agent shouted. He pulled out the cheap black replica handgun Derek had used to threaten me. He cleared the chamber, and a single brass round fell to the floor with a sharp click, spinning like a coin before settling right against my boot. "Weapon secured," the agent said, bagging it. Then he reached into the inner pocket of Derek's suit jacket. He pulled out a small, clear plastic baggie filled with white powder. "Narcotics," the agent held it up to the light. "Looks like cocaine." Derek's eyes nearly popped out of his skull. "No, that's not mine. I mean, that was just for the stress. I'm not a dealer. It's personal use." "Unlawful possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. Possession of a controlled substance. Wire fraud. Elder abuse." The team leader rattled off the charges like a long grocery receipt. "You're looking at an easy 20 years, kid." Derek started to weep. It wasn't the cry of a man who was sorry. It was the cry of a toddler caught with his hand in the cookie jar, only to realize the jar was full of scorpions. "Dad, please." He looked up at me, tears and snot running down his face, begging, Tell them it's a misunderstanding. Tell them I'm your son-in-law." I looked at the gun in the evidence bag, the one that had been pressed against my forehead less than an hour ago. I looked at the drugs, the stuff that explained the erratic pacing and the manic, desperate need for cash. I looked at the man who had crushed Eleanor's orchids and locked me in a dark room. "I don't have a son-in-law." My voice was granite. "My son-in-law died a long time ago. You're just a thief who broke into his house." Take him out, the leader ordered. Two agents hoisted Derek up. He was dead weight, his feet dragging along the floorboards as they escorted him through the shattered front entrance and out into the flashing strobe lights of the street. The neighbors were all out on their lawns, watching the spectacle, witnessing the total downfall of the most arrogant yuppie on the block. I watched him go, feeling absolutely nothing. No joy, no sorrow. Just the cold satisfaction of a financial ledger, finally balancing to zero. Right as Derek was being tossed into the back of a federal transport van, bound for a holding facility 30 miles away, a completely different scene was playing out at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. Chloe stood in the international security line, wearing oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, trying her best to look like a regular tourist heading out on a tropical getaway. She had used a credit card she'd secretly opened in my name months ago to book a one-way ticket to Cabo, Mexico. She tapped her foot nervously, checking her phone every 10 seconds. She'd already seen the news alerts about the police activity in Westlake Hills. She knew the house of cards was falling, and she had chosen to run, leaving her husband in the wreckage. She reached the front of the line and handed her passport to the TSA agent, her hand trembling slightly. "Going somewhere warm?" the agent asked, glancing at her boarding pass. "Yes," Chloe forced a tight smile. "Just a vacation, a much-needed break." The agent nodded, waving her through to the scanners. She placed her carry-on baggage, a designer Louis Vuitton roller bag, onto the conveyor belt and stepped through the metal detector. She held her breath, waiting for the beep. Silence. She let out a massive sigh of relief. She'd made it. She was going to get away. "Ma'am?" She froze. A TSA supervisor was standing by the monitor, looking at the X-ray image of her bag. He gestured to two uniformed police officers standing near the checkpoint. "Is this your bag, ma'am?" the supervisor asked, pointing to the monitor. "Yes." Chloe's voice turned sharp. "Why? Is there an issue?" "Step over here, please." The officers moved in, blocking her path to the gates. "I have a flight to catch," Chloe snapped, her high-class entitlement flaring up even in the face of danger. "I don't have time for this." "Step over here now," the officer repeated, his hand resting on his utility belt. They led her over to a stainless steel inspection table. The supervisor zipped open the suitcase. Chloe watched, her heart pounding frantically against her ribs. Tucked right between the silk lingerie and designer swimwear was a heavy velvet pouch. The supervisor opened the pouch and dumped the contents onto the metal table. Diamonds, emeralds, rubies, solid gold. A literal treasure trove. It was Eleanor's jewelry collection. Every single piece of sentimentality I had gifted my wife over 40 years of marriage. The necklace from our honeymoon, the bracelet from the day Chloe was born, the ring from our 25th anniversary. All of it, stolen straight from my master bedroom while I was locked in the basement. "Those are mine," Chloe lied instantly. "Those are family heirlooms. My grandmother left them to me?" "Was your grandmother's name Eleanor Vance?" the officer asked, holding up a solid gold locket engraved with the name. Chloe's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "We got an APB from Austin PD regarding a grand larceny involving these exact items," the officer said, pulling out a pair of cuffs. "No," Chloe screamed, stepping back. "No, you don't understand. My dad gave them to me. He's confused. He forgot. We already pulled the security footage from the pawn shop where you tried to appraise 2 of those rings yesterday, ma'am." The officer stepped forward. "You're under arrest for grand larceny, possession of stolen property, and fleeing prosecution." Chloe let out a piercing shriek that made half the terminal turn their heads. "Derek!" she screamed as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. "Derek, help me! Call the lawyer!" But Derek wasn't there. Derek was in a cage on wheels, heading to a federal holding cell. As they marched her away through the staring crowd, Chloe caught her reflection in the glass of a duty-free shop window. She saw a woman who thought she was untouchable, a woman who thought beauty and youth were currencies that could buy anything. Now she was just another criminal in handcuffs, dragging a bag of someone else's memories to trade for a plane ticket. The phone in my pocket buzzed. I pulled it out, standing in the ruined kitchen. "Package 2 secured," Evelyn's text read. I looked around the empty house. The silence had returned, but this time it wasn't suffocating. It was clean. the silence of a job completed. I walked out the front door, stepping past the shattered wooden frame and the police tape. I didn't look back. I walked down the driveway toward the agents packing up their gear. "Mr. Vance," the team leader said, walking over, "we're going to need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. We can give you a ride." I looked at the black SUV idling by the curb, then looked down the street. "No, thank you," I said. "I've got my own ride." I walked past the SUVs, heading toward the shadow of the corner where a weathered Ford F250 was idling quietly. Marcus was in the driver's seat. I climbed into the passenger side, the smell of old coffee and motor oil filling the cab. It smelled like home. "Got 'em both?" Marcus asked, throwing it into gear. "Got 'em both?" I said, leaning my head against the seat rest. Marcus nodded, pulling the truck away from the curb and driving slowly down the quiet street. "Where to?" he asked. "Take me to a hotel," I said. "I need a shower, and then I need to call a contractor. I've got a greenhouse to rebuild." The heavy steel door of the federal detention facility slammed shut behind me with a definitive airlocking thud. I was getting used to that sound lately. First in the basement of my confinement, and now in this federal penitentiary in Beaumont. The air inside smelled like a mix of industrial cleaner and unwashed bodies, the kind of scent that sticks to the back of your throat and refuses to leave. I walked down the long gray corridor, guided by a guard who looked too young to carry a sidearm. I was 68, wearing my finest dark suit, leaning slightly on a walking cane. I didn't really need the cane. It was more of a dignity prop than a mobility tool. I kept my chin up, my eyes locked straight ahead. I wasn't here to visit family. I was here to audit the wreckage of a life I'd built. And then I saw him. On the other side of the thick, bulletproof plexiglass partition sat a man I barely recognized. Derek looked 20 years older than the last time I saw him being shoved into the back of that cruiser. The arrogant tech mogul in the custom Italian suit was gone. In his place was a hollow, shivering inmate in a bright orange jumpsuit. His head had been shaved down to the scalp, revealing the harsh contour of his skull, making him look both vulnerable and hardened. His eyes, which used to be so sharp and calculating, were sunken deep into their sockets, framed by dark, bloodshot circles from a complete lack of sleep. He couldn't sit still. He kept picking at the raw skin around his cuticles, his leg bouncing nervously under the metal table, sending vibrations through the concrete floor all the way to my side of the glass. The second I sat down, he grabbed the heavy black phone receiver. His hands were shaking so violently that the coiled cord whipped through the air. I took my time, deliberately picking up my receiver. The plastic casing felt greasy against my ear, holding the stale heat of the last inmate who had sat here begging for a miracle. "Dad," he said, swallowing hard, his voice carrying through the line with a sharp electronic hiss. "Dad, oh my God, thank you for coming. You have to get me out of here. It's an absolute nightmare inside. The guys in my cell block, they know who I am. They saw the news. They call me the patricide. They think I tried to kill you. They're beating me up, Dad. Look." He tilted his head to the side, showing me a deep, purplish bruise spreading behind his ear and running down his neck. I didn't even blink. I analyzed the injury the same way I would evaluate a hairline crack in a structural wall. Surface damage, ugly to look at, but functionally intact. "You look terrible, Derek," I said, my voice completely flat, offering zero comfort. "I know I look terrible," he hissed, leaning so close his breath fogged up the glass. "That's why you need to help me. I talked to my public defender. He says bail is set at $1 million because I'm a flight risk and because of the weapons charge. But you have that kind of money, Dad. I know you do. The feds told me everything during the interrogation. They told me about your offshore trusts, the tens of millions from the whistleblower rewards. They told me you were the one who bought the ranch back." He paused, licking his dry lips, his eyes holding a toxic mix of awe and deep-seated resentment. "You played me, Arthur. You had me in a chokehold the entire time. You sat on tens of millions of dollars while you watched me drown for cash flow. You let me make a deal with the Miami mob. You could have cut a single check and saved me, but you watched me drown. You let me dig through a filthy scrapyard looking for a clock that didn't even exist, just to humiliate me." I leaned forward, my reflection overlapping with his face on the glass. I watched you drown, Derek, because you're the one who drilled holes in the bottom of your own boat, I said, hitting every syllable with icy precision. You embezzled your investors' capital. You ran up debts you couldn't pay, and when the water started rising, you didn't ask me for a life jacket. You tried to use my body as a raft. But I can make it right. Derek cut me off, sweat pouring down his face, completely unhinged. If you post my bail, the lawyer says I can fight this. If I cooperate, if I turn on Ivan in Miami and the people running the laundering operation, I can cut a plea deal. But I can't do any of that from inside a cage, Dad. I need to be out to prepare my defense. I need a real heavyweight attorney, not this public defender hack who just keeps telling me to take the fall. You have the money. You can retain the best criminal defense team in the state. You can save me. Since you're the one who set the trap, you owe me. I looked at my son-in-law, the young man who used to sit at my dinner table talking about big visions and market disruption. I looked for any remaining spark of the person he used to be, but all I saw was a cornered criminal trying to pull off one last scam, trying to manipulate the man he had already tried to destroy. I have the money, I said slowly, letting the weight of every word sink in. I could post your bond today. I could hire a defense team that would give the district attorney a migraine. If I throw enough capital at it, I could probably get your sentence knocked down to probation. My trust could buy out this entire facility. A desperate, pathetic spark of hope flared in Derek's eyes. So you'll do it? You'll help me? You're going to get me out? No, I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and definitive, like a granite tombstone. Why? He whispered, the hope vanishing instantly. Why the hell not? I'm family. No, you aren't, I replied calmly. You were family when you married my daughter. You were family when I introduced you to your first venture capital contact. You were family when you couldn't clear the down payment on your Westlake Hills mansion, and I quietly covered the difference. But that Arthur is dead. Derek shook his head, totally confused. What are you talking about? You're sitting right there. You're alive. I moved closer to the glass, dropping my voice to a whisper that carried the entire weight of my betrayal. He died the night you kicked him off his own land. He died the moment you shoved him down into a stagnant basement multimedia room and turned the lock. He died when you pumped him full of sedatives to turn him into a vegetable so you could steal his life. You killed him, Derek. You buried him right under that house, just as sure as if you'd put a bullet in his temple. The man sitting in front of you today isn't your father-in-law. I'm just the victim who survived, and I'm the primary witness for the prosecution. Derek recoiled as if I'd physically struck him across the face. Tears began to stream down his cheeks. Real tears this time. The tears of a man who realized he had just torched the only bridge that ever mattered. Dad, please, he sobbed, pressing his palms against the glass, snot running down his face. I'm sorry. I was just so scared. I was cornered. I love you, Dad. Don't leave me in here. Don't let me die in this place. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the concrete floor. I adjusted my suit jacket and smoothed down my collar, looking down at him one last time. I didn't feel any anger anymore. I didn't feel hatred. I just felt a profound, absolute emptiness. You made your bed, Derek, I said. Now you have to sleep in it. And unlike the one you gave me, yours comes with a toilet next to the pillow. I hung up the receiver. The heavy click of the plastic hitting the cradle cut his sobbing off instantly. I turned my back on him, walking toward the heavy steel exit door. Even through the reinforced glass, I could hear him screaming my name. The muffled, distant thuds of his fists pounding against the plexiglass, sounding exactly like a man buried alive. I signaled the guard to open the gate. I stepped out into the bright parking lot, taking a deep breath of the hot Texas air. It tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. I lost a daughter and a son-in-law, but I liquidated the liabilities and took back my life. At the end of the day, that was a transaction I was entirely willing to accept. Oh, the courtroom was nothing short of pure theater, and Chloe was delivering the performance of her life. She sat on the witness stand wearing a conservative navy blue cardigan and a knee-length skirt. an outfit she wouldn't have been caught dead in a month ago. Her hair, which her social media followers always saw in perfect, beachy waves, was pulled back tightly into a severe, modest bun. She wore zero makeup, leaving her face pale, intentionally highlighting the dark circles under her eyes. She looked like a nun. She looked like a victim. She looked absolutely nothing like the woman who had laughed while locking a basement door. I sat in the very back row of the gallery, both hands resting on the handle of my cane. I was a silent observer, a ghost at the feast. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Sterling, was guiding Chloe through her testimony. Chloe had taken a plea deal, or at least she thought she had. In exchange for leniency, she had agreed to turn state's evidence against Derek, painting him as the mastermind and herself as the battered, coerced wife who had no choice but to go along with her husband's schemes. It was all Derek. She sobbed into a tissue, dabbing at dry eyes. He controlled everything. He had this horrible temper. You saw the gun the police found. That was his. He used to wave it around the house, threatening me, saying that if I didn't help him get access to my dad's assets, he would hurt both of us. I was terrified. I just wanted to protect my father. I watched her lie with the exact same casual ease she used to apply filters to her photos. To save her own skin, she didn't hesitate for a single second to throw the man she had sworn to spend her life with straight into the woodcracker. She told the jury about the forgeries, claiming Derek made her sit and watch him practice my signature for weeks. She told them about the medication, claiming Derek forced her to hide the pills in the pantry. She even blamed the sale of the ranch on him, saying she had begged him not to do it. I didn't know what to do, she whispered, her voice trembling perfectly. I was a prisoner in my own home, just like my dad. The jury looked entirely sympathetic. I could see a few of them nodding. Their protective instincts were flaring up at the sight of a young woman crying about an abusive husband. They wanted to rescue her. They wanted to believe her. I smiled, a cold, tiny movement that didn't reach my eyes. What Chloe didn't know was that I had met with Prosecutor Sterling 2 days ago. I had walked into the DA's office, placed my old Nokia burner phone on her desk, and played the audio recordings from the ventilation shaft. I showed her the photos of the text messages from Stephen, the yoga instructor, and I handed over the unedited footage of Chloe setting up her tripod to record those fake lifestyle videos in front of a heavily sedated father. Ms. Sterling stood up for cross-examination, holding the tablet as she walked slowly toward the witness stand. The sympathy in the courtroom was thick enough to choke on, but the prosecution was about to bring down a massive sledgehammer on Chloe's glass house. Mrs. Vance, Sterling began, her voice deceptively calm, you claim you were terrified of your husband. You claim you participated in the systemic abuse of your father, Mr. Arthur Vance, solely out of fear for your life. Is that correct? Yes, Chloe sniffled. I was so scared. And you also claim that you had zero autonomy in financial decisions, that you were merely a bystander. Yes, Derek handled all the money. Sterling nodded, then turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce new evidence into the record. State's Exhibits G and H. The bailiff took the tablet and synced it to the large display screens facing the jury box. Chloe frowned, a flicker of genuine confusion cutting through her tears. She had no idea what was coming. She thought the only evidence the state had was what was pulled during the raid. Sterling hit play. Chloe's bright, sunny social media voice filled the courtroom. It was the raw, unedited footage of her recording those videos from the basement, begging her followers for money while I sat slumped in a chair in the background. Perfect, her on-screen voice muttered, a cold smirk spreading across her face. $2,000 in 10 minutes. Keep acting crazy, old man. It pays the bills. The jury let out a collective gasp. All those sympathetic nods vanished instantly. Chloe turned a ghastly shade of white, white-knuckling the railing of the witness stand. That, Ms. Sterling said, pausing for maximum effect, is not the voice of a terrified wife. That is the voice of a co-conspirator calculating her profit margins. But let us continue. She swiped the screen and a photo of Chloe's phone popped up, the notification from Stephen, the yoga instructor. Is the zombie old man asleep yet? Thinking about you tonight. That idiot Derek won't suspect a thing. As soon as the cash clears, we're heading to Dubai. Murmurs erupted across the courtroom. Chloe looked like she was about to throw up, staring at the high-definition proof of her infidelity and cruelty displayed for everyone to see. So, Sterling's voice hardened, Mrs. Vance, you weren't afraid of your husband. You were cheating on him, and you referred to your father, the man you claim you wanted to protect, as a zombie old man. I can explain, Chloe stammered, standing up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. That was just a joke. I was under so much stress. Derek forced me. Sit down, Mrs. Vance, the judge barked, slamming the gavel down with a deafening crack. Sterling wasn't done. She played the final audio clip, the recording I'd captured from the ventilation shaft on my first night in the basement. We can just leave an automatic feeder downstairs, Chloe's sneering voice echoed through the speakers. We deserve this money, Derek. I want my trip to the Maldives. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy and suffocating. It was the kind of quiet that sucked all the air out of the room, because the truth was just too hideous to face. You are no victim, Mrs. Vance, Sterling said in her closing statement. You are an accomplice. You are a co-conspirator. In many ways, you were the architect of this abuse. You stripped a 68-year-old man of his humanity for clicks and cash. You defrauded your husband while cheating on him, and when the cracks appeared, you stole your late mother's jewelry to buy a plane ticket out of the country. Chloe looked at the jury, terror choking her throat. She looked for the sympathy she'd seen just minutes ago, but it was gone, replaced by pure disgust. Then she looked at me. Dad, she wailed, reaching her hands out toward the gallery. Tell them I took care of you. I brought you food. I stood up slowly, leaning on my cane, and locked my eyes onto hers across the crowded courtroom. You brought me poison, Chloe. My voice carried into every single corner of the room. You sedated me and called it care. You aren't the prey. You're just a predator who got caught. The judge handed down the sentence 3 days later. The plea deal Chloe had counted on was completely torn up. The prosecutor demanded the maximum sentence, citing elder abuse and the exceptionally malicious nature of the crime. Chloe stood before the bench, stripped of her dignity and her lies. The judge, an older woman with zero patience for people who preyed on the vulnerable, looked at her over the top of her glasses. You have shown a shocking lack of empathy and a deeply disturbing amount of greed, the judge said. You didn't see your father as a human being. You saw him as an asset to liquidate. You manipulated the public. You betrayed your family, and you tried to flee justice. Please, Chloe begged, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I'll give the money back. I'll do community service. You will give it back, the judge agreed. You'll pay with your time. On the charges of grand larceny, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and elder abuse, I sentence you to 8 years in state prison. Remand to custody immediately. The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. Chloe screamed, a raw, primal sound of someone refusing to accept reality. 2 bailiffs stepped up and grabbed her arms. She thrashed wildly, her heels skidding against the floorboards, looking exactly like she did when Derek dragged her down to the basement to find a clock that didn't exist. No, she screamed, looking back at me as they dragged her through the side door. Dad, please, you can stop this. You have the money. You can hire the best lawyers. I watched her go, her face twisted into an ugly mask of pure panic. I remembered her spending days filming me, mocking me while I played senile. I remembered the sheer contempt in her eyes when she looked at my furniture, my clothes, my life. I could have stopped it. I could have hired the best defense team in the state. I could have claimed I was confused and that I'd given her permission. But I didn't. I turned and walked out of the courtroom, the rhythmic thump-thump of my cane on the marble floor beating the time to my exit. Chloe wanted a life of luxury, and she wanted to be taken care of. Now, for the next 8 years, she'd have a roof over her head, 3 meals a day, and a strict schedule. It wasn't the Maldives, but it was exactly what she deserved. Oh, The sound of a hammer hitting wood echoed through the property, a crisp, rhythmic noise of construction, of progress, of moving forward. To me, it was the most beautiful music in the world. I stood on the lawn of my ranch house, hands on my hips, watching the crew work. These weren't the rough, careless day laborers Derek had hired to tear my life apart. These were union guys, master carpenters and bricklayers I'd hired personally, using connections from my 40 years in the business. They treated the wood with respect. They measured twice, and they built things to last. I moved back into the house the exact second the police cleared the crime scene tape. The place had felt violated, smelling of stagnant air and strangers. The hardwood floors were scoured with scuff marks from movers' boots and police equipment. The walls still seemed to hold the echoes of the night I was dragged out in handcuffs. Most men would have sold it. Most men would have taken the money and moved to some retirement community in Florida, trying to run away from the memory. But I'm not most men. I'm an auditor. When the foundation of a structure is solid, you don't abandon the building just because the windows are broken. You fix it. You reinforce it. You make it stronger than it was before. I walked up the steps of the new front porch. The wood was fresh, smelling of cedar and sap. I ran my hand along the railing, checking the sanding. Smooth. Perfect. I'd ordered them to tear down the old porch structural layout that the excavator had smashed. I didn't want a patch job. I wanted a clean slate. I wanted to erase every single fingerprint Derek and Chloe had left on this land. Inside, the house was a hive of activity. Painters were rolling a fresh coat of warm cream onto the walls, covering up the stains and the shadows. I'd had the old carpets ripped out, exposing the original long-leaf pine underneath. I hired a specialist to sand and refinish the floors until they gleamed like honey in the afternoon sun. I walked into the kitchen. The old cabinets that Chloe had ransacked looking for money were gone, replaced by solid, heavy oak. My kitchen was never going to be a place of fear again. It was going to be a place of sustenance. I walked down to the basement door, stepping inside the soundproofed space. I stood in the entryway, looking into the dark hole where my daughter and her husband had kept me prisoner. It still smelled a bit like mildew and cold air. I could have sealed it off. I could have put up drywall and pretended it didn't exist. But that's a coward's move. I walked down the steps, my boots thudding heavily against the wood. I flipped on the lights. The lumpy mattress was gone. The cardboard box, table was gone. It was just an empty room. I'm converting this into a wine cellar, I told the contractor standing behind me. I want climate control, cedar racks, and high-end lighting. He nodded, scratching it down on his clipboard. You got it, Mr. Vance. I was taking the space back. I was going to fill this room with things that got better with time, things that accumulated value instead of rotting, a stark contrast to my relationship with my daughter. I wanted to come down here to select a fine Merlot, not sit in the dark waiting for a bowl of sedated oatmeal. By the end of the month, the renovation was complete. The house didn't look like the place Eleanor and I had lived in anymore. It looked better. It looked like the home of a man who had been through a storm and come out standing tall on the other side. I bought new furniture, leather armchairs that smelled like success, a dining table carved from reclaimed walnut, and a sound system that played my jazz records with crystal-clear precision. I sat in my living room listening to John Coltrane play a saxophone solo that sounded like a prayer. I looked around. There were no photos of Chloe, no photos of Derek. Every trace of her graduation, her wedding, her childhood was gone. I had burned them all in the fire pit out back, watching the faces curl and blacken into ash. It was a funeral service for a daughter who had died long before she ever went to prison. The doorbell rang. It was a Friday evening, 6 months after Derek's arrest. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of falling leaves. I walked over and opened it. Marcus was standing on the porch, wearing a button-down shirt and slacks, holding a bottle of high-end bourbon. "You clean up nice, Marcus," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "You don't look too bad yourself, Arthur," he grunted, handing me the bottle. Behind him, a black Lincoln Town car pulled up to the curb. The driver opened the door and Evelyn stepped out. She was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first truck, but her smile was genuine. She carried a briefcase in one hand and a box of cigars in the other. "Folks," I said, "welcome." We sat in the dining room under the warm light of the new chandelier. The table was set for 3. I had cooked dinner myself, a standing rib roast with garlic mashed potatoes, green beans with bacon, and homemade cornbread. It was a meal Eleanor used to make, tasting of comfort and history. We ate and we talked. We didn't talk about Chloe. We didn't talk about Derek or the trial or the prison sentences. That was old news. That was construction debris we had already cleared away. We talked about baseball. We talked about the changing Austin skyline. We talked about the old days, back when a handshake meant something and loyalty wasn't a currency to be traded. Evelyn wiped her mouth with a linen napkin and leaned back in her chair. She looked at me, her sharp eyes softening just a fraction. "You know, Arthur," she said, swirling the red wine in her glass, "we need to talk about the elephant in the room. Or rather, the elephant in the trust fund." I nodded. I knew this conversation was coming. The offshore trusts were still generating capital. The $1.5 million I'd used to bait Derek had been returned to me in full after the investigation cleared. My net worth was staggering, and I was a 68-year-old man with no heirs. "The state has frozen Derek's assets," Evelyn continued. "We've clawed back almost everything they took from you. Your pension, the unauthorized withdrawals. It's all back in your accounts. Combined with the market turn, your portfolio is incredibly healthy. So the question remains, old friend, what do you want to do with the money? You can't take it with you." I looked over at Marcus. He was sipping his bourbon, watching me. He understood loneliness. He understood the heavy weight of an estate with nowhere to go. I looked around my beautiful, restored home, listening to the quiet crackle of the fireplace, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely at peace. I knew exactly what I was going to do with every single dollar. "How are you planning to structure the next phase of your legacy?" "I've been thinking a lot about that," I said. I looked around the room at the wealth I had built, the same wealth that had almost cost me my life. "It's funny, Evelyn. For 30 years, I saved every single penny for Chloe. I thought I was building her a future. But money is like water. It takes the exact shape of whatever container you pour it into. Chloe and Derek, they're a sieve. Money was only ever going to run straight through them." "So what's the blueprint?" Evelyn asked. "You want to travel? Buy a yacht?" I let out a soft chuckle and shook my head. "I'm too damn old for a yacht, and I've seen enough of the world. I want to build something, Evelyn, but not a building. I want to start a foundation." "A foundation?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "I want to establish the Eleanor Vance Scholarship for Forensic Accounting and Business Ethics," I said, the words feeling right in my mouth, heavy and substantial. "I want to find kids like I used to be. Kids from the rougher parts of South Austin who have the brains but zero money. The kind of kids who look at a financial statement and see the underlying math, not just a wall of numbers. I want to pay for their tuition, their books, their housing. I want to give them the head start I never had." Evelyn smiled, a slow, brilliant expression. "That's a lot of capital, Arthur. We're talking about a permanent endowment. Make it happen," I said firmly. "Draft the paperwork. I want the first class of scholars selected by next fall. I only have one condition." "What's that?" "They have to take a mandatory class on business ethics," I said. My daughter and her husband knew exactly how to count money, but they didn't have a clue what it was actually worth. I want these kids to know the difference. "Deal." Evelyn raised her glass. "To the Eleanor Vance Scholarship." "To Eleanor," Marcus added, raising his bourbon. "To the future," I said, clinking my glass against theirs. We sat there for hours, trading stories, laughing, and drinking good wine. It was the best dinner I'd had in years. A real family dinner. Not the blood family you're born into, but the family you choose for yourself. The kind that stays standing right next to you when the walls start crumbling down. Late that night, after Evelyn and Marcus had left, I stood in the hallway looking at the new security control panel. It was a top-of-the-line system. Biometric scanners, motion sensors, reinforced electronic deadbolts. The place was a fortress. I tapped the screen, cycling through the live camera feeds. I could see the front porch, the driveway, the backyard, and the perimeter lines. Every single angle was covered in high-definition night vision. I watched a car cruise slowly past the house, brake for a second, and then accelerate away. Just a neighbor, but my instincts still flared for a split second before I relaxed. The system was armed. The perimeter was secure. I touched the screen, looking at the empty driveway where Derek's Porsche used to sit, and where Chloe used to take her influencer photos. Now it was just clean concrete and moonlight. "Nobody gets in," I whispered to the empty hallway. "Not unless I open the door myself. Not friends, not neighbors, and especially not family." I turned off the panel, walked into the kitchen, and poured the last of the Cabernet into my glass. I stepped out onto the back porch. The night air was crisp, and the stars were pinned across the sky like tiny punctures in black velvet. I sat down in the rocker, the wood groaning softly under my weight. I took a sip of the wine, tasting the dark berries and the oak. It tasted like freedom. I'm 68 years old. I have no wife. I have no children. I live completely alone in a massive house full of expensive furniture. People might look at me and see a sad old man, a victim, a tragedy. But as I rocked back and forth, listening to the wind rustle through the oak leaves, I didn't feel sad at all. I felt heavy, yes, because I had seen just how dark human nature could get. But I also felt incredibly light, the kind of lightness that only comes when you drop a massive sack of lies. I had faced the absolute worst betrayal a father could ever experience, and I survived it. I dismantled the trap, and I caught the hunters. I rebuilt my home on my own terms. I raised my glass toward the moon. "Here's to you, Arthur," I said softly. "You're still standing." In the deep, absolute quiet of the midnight hour, surrounded by the fortress I had built with my own hands, I finally found the peace I had been looking for. It was a lonely kind of peace, a quiet kind of peace, but it was entirely mine, and no one was ever going to take it away from me again. My journey had taught me one undeniable fact. Blood does not guarantee loyalty. We spend our entire lives building houses, careers, and families, but the strongest foundation must always be your own self-worth. I realized that saying no to toxic people, even when they share your last name, is the ultimate act of self-love. You can't save people who are hell-bent on drowning, and you damn sure can't let them use you as an anchor to drag you down with them. Real peace only comes when you stop setting yourself on fire just to keep everybody else warm. I lost a daughter, but I took back my life, and that was a liquidation worth every single cent.